Hello, everyone. Omni-Sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Harry Potter as a Young Severus Snape? Part 3. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it. The return journey to Ilvermorny was quieter than their journey to New Orleans. After 3 grueling days at the Cirque du Combat, exhaustion clung to the group like a second skin. Some students slept, others stared out at the passing landscape, lost in thought. Severus sat by the window, silent. His fingers traced the edge of his evaluation parchment, folded neatly in his robes. His mind replayed every duel, every correction, every mistake. He had learned more in 3 days than he had in years of Hogwarts dueling practice. He had witnessed what real-world combat looked like. He had felt what it was like to fight without structured defenses. He had finally understood just how much his training had held him back. But what unsettled him the most? Wandless magic. For the first time, he had felt his own magic pulse through him, responding not to words, not to rigid technique, but to his sheer will. And it had nearly terrified him. Magic without rules. Magic without form. Magic that is raw and instinctive. He had spent years perfecting precision, control, and calculation. Now, he had to unlearn all of it. He exhaled, fingers tightening slightly. He would not be left behind. Not by Damien. Not by the duelists at Cirque du Combat. Not by his own limitations. The moment they stepped through the gates of Ilvermorny, it became immediately clear. People had heard about the workshop. Not just rumors. Actual details. Severus wasn't sure who had spread the news, but judging by the curious glances, everyone knew that the exchange student had held his own at Cirque du Combat. Some were impressed. A few younger students looked at him like he had stepped out of some legendary battle. Some were jealous. Students who prided themselves on being Ilvermorny's best duelists now had competition. Some resented the attention. Whispers of, "He's British. Why should we care?" followed him down the halls. And then there were the real duelists, students who took combat seriously. They didn't whisper. They didn't gossip. They watched. One of them, a tall 7th-year Wampus student, fell into step beside Severus as he made his way toward the common room. "Boy, Shafik." Severus turned his head slightly. "Heard you held your own at the Cirque." The older boy smirked, looking him over. "I didn't think a Hogwarts student would be up for that." Severus raised an eyebrow. "Where did you hear that?" The boy shrugged. News travels fast when it's about someone interesting. Severus didn't respond. He had no interest in fame. But he wasn't stupid. His name held weight now. And in the world of dueling, that was both a blessing and a challenge. Severus had always trained alone. At Hogwarts, he kept his talents hidden. But now he had friends. And so, 2 nights after their return, he found himself in one of Ilvermorny's underground training halls, not alone. Jonas and Ben were already sparring, dueling at half speed, working on footwork and counters. Evie, despite being naturally reckless, had a sharp instinct for quick-draw spell work. Kira and Aurora, who weren't as interested in combat, still joined, watching and learning, because, as Aurora put it, knowing how to duel and knowing how to survive are the same thing. Alessandro? He just enjoyed the show, occasionally throwing out commentary. Severus squared off against Ben first. The first few rounds were frustrating. Ben was more physical. His movements were fast and aggressive. He forced Severus back constantly, never giving him a second to recover. Severus adjusted, adapted. By the 3rd round, he had learned Ben's rhythm, dodging before Ben could fully commit to a strike. "Clever," Ben panted, stepping back. "You study your opponent fast." Severus wiped sweat from his brow. "I have to." Next was Evie. She was fast and unpredictable, the kind of duelist who threw spells in a way that forced her opponent to react. She nearly clipped him twice before he realized she wasn't aiming to hit. She was forcing him into position. It was a trap. Severus barely sidestepped in time. Evie grinned. "Not bad, Shafik. You learn quick." Severus rolled his shoulders, exhaling. "Not quick enough." By the end of the session, his muscles ached. His mind burned with new tactics, and he realized something. He was improving, not just through isolated study, not just through self-training, but because he had friends who challenged him. And That was new, and it was something he greatly appreciated. But at the end of the day, Severus was an introvert who enjoyed learning and working just by himself as well. So, Severus needed a private space. Training in Ilvermorny's common halls was useful, but not enough. He needed somewhere quiet, somewhere secluded, somewhere he wouldn't have to worry about being watched. And to his surprise, it was Alessandro who provided the answer. "Shafiq, my dear friend," Alessandro said dramatically, draping an arm over Severus's shoulder. What you truly need is an escape." Severus tilted his head. "You mean a place to train?" Alessandro smirked. Yes, that too." Severus narrowed his eyes. "What's the catch?" Alessandro sighed, placing a hand over his chest. "Must you be so suspicious of me?" Severus raised an eyebrow. Alessandro chuckled. "Fine. No catch. Follow me." He led Severus through a series of hidden corridors, deep into the less-used parts of Ilvermorny. Eventually, they arrived at a large and used guest suite. The room was spacious, with high ceilings and thick stone walls, soundproof. Severus glanced at Alessandro. "How do you know about this place?" Alessandro grinned. "Let's just say I have my uses." Severus stared at him for a long moment. Then, "Do I even want to know?" Alessandro smirked. "Absolutely not." Severus exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're insufferable. And yet, you love me." Severus didn't dignify that with a response. But later that night, as he stood in the empty room alone, he knew this was exactly what he needed. Severus didn't just have one goal. He had several: perfecting his potion invention, refining his dueling techniques, training his wandless magic. He split his time carefully. Mornings, brewing experiments, adjusting the formula, refining the moonstone infusion process. Afternoons, practicing structured dueling, honing his reaction time with Jonas and Ben. Evenings, wandless magic. Alone, in the hidden chamber Alessandro had given him. Progress was slow, frustratingly so. The potion wasn't perfect yet, still unstable. His dueling technique had improved, but he was still slower than the others. And wandless magic? Still barely flickering. But every day, he was closer. And as he stood in his hidden training room one night, staring at the faint glow of magic in his fingertips, he exhaled softly. It was happening. Slowly. Painfully. But it was happening. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't doing it alone. Severus was not used to being pursued. Not like this. He had spent years as the awkward, scrawny Slytherin that no one looked at twice, except to mock. And now? Now he was standing in the dimly lit training chamber, shirt clinging to his skin from exertion, wand still tucked away, and Celine Everett was watching him like he was something worth hunting. The first time she had approached him, it had been after a dueling session. He had just finished a set of wandless magic drills, his magic still tingling beneath his skin, when a voice, smooth, self-assured, cut through the quiet. "Do you ever stop?" Severus turned his head. Celine Everett was leaning against the doorway of the training hall, arms crossed, smirking like she already knew the answer. Tall and athletic, built like a duelist, lean muscle, graceful movements, a predator's ease in every step. Deep brown skin, smooth and radiant, like polished mahogany kissed by the sun. Dark, coiled curls, falling just past her shoulders. Wild but intentional, the kind that framed her sharp, striking features. Eyes like molten gold, intense and unreadable, with a sharpness that cut through every layer of deception. Full lips, often curved into either a smirk or something far more dangerous. A jagged scar, barely visible, tracing the side of her jaw, evidence of a past duel she had clearly won. Celine Everett was the kind of woman who owned every room she walked into. Not because she was loud, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't ask for it. She simply took it. She was effortless, not in the way people tried to be, but in the way that came from never needing permission to exist as she was. Someone who had been at the Cirque du Combat workshop. He had noticed her there. Not because she had spoken to him, but because she fought with a style that was wild, relentless, almost reckless. The kind of duelist who didn't fight to win. She fought to dominate. Severus wiped his face with his sleeve before answering. "Not if I can help it." Celine's smirk widened. "Good answer." He expected her to leave. She didn't. Instead, she stepped closer, tilting her head, assessing him like he was a puzzle she was figuring out in real time. I've seen the way you duel. Severus raised an eyebrow. And you fight like you have something to prove. Silence. His fingers curled slightly, but he didn't deny it. Because she was right. Celine held his gaze, as if she was waiting for him to say something. Then, suddenly, that's hot. Severus blinked. Out of all the responses he had expected, criticism, another challenge, even dismissal, that had not been one of them. Celine laughed softly at his expression. Relax, Shafiq. It's a compliment. Severus cleared his throat, trying to reassemble his thoughts. I see. She grinned, like she was enjoying this far too much. You know, most guys would jump at the chance if I showed interest. Severus studied her carefully. I'm not most guys. Celine's smirk deepened. That's what makes you interesting. Then, without warning, she reached out. Light, easy touch, fingertips brushing over the inside of his wrist. Severus stilled. Not because he was uncomfortable. Because he had no idea how to react. Because no one had ever touched him like this. Casually. Intimately. Like she wasn't afraid of the proximity. Like she was testing him. You ever think about not being all work and no play? His pulse quickened. Not visibly. Not noticeably. But he felt it. Severus wasn't naive. He knew what this was. Celine Everett was confident. Experienced. And completely unapologetic about it. He wasn't. At least, not in this. I have goals, he said smoothly, pushing down the unfamiliar feeling in his chest. A relationship isn't my priority right now. Celine smirked. Who said anything about a relationship? Severus met her gaze. She didn't look away. Didn't falter. Her confidence was almost hypnotic. Then, just as effortlessly, she stepped back. Let me know if you change your mind. And just like that, she was gone. Severus exhaled sharply, stared at the empty doorway for a long moment. It was the first time someone had shown interest in him. He clenched his jaw, shaking his head, forcing himself to focus. For now, he had bigger priorities. But Celine Everett? She was trouble. And Severus had a feeling this wasn't the last time she would cross his path. It had been a week since their first conversation. A week of Celine not saucily testing his patience. A week of Severus pretending not to notice. But that night, she found him alone. Again. Severus had finished training, his muscles burning, his mind still racing with calculations from his last set of drills. He turned to grab his robe, and she was there. Standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Severus exhaled slowly. Do you make a habit of following people? Celine smirked. Only the interesting ones. Severus rolled his eyes. I'm busy. I know. Then why are you here? Celine stepped closer. Because I wanted to be. There was no hesitation in her tone. Severus opened his mouth, but for once, he had no idea what to say. Celine looked up at him, tilting her head slightly. You're different. Severus raised an eyebrow. I'm aware. She laughed softly. No. I mean, she gestured at him, at the training room, at everything about him. You don't waste time. You don't pretend to be something you're not. You're just real. Severus didn't respond. Because, for some reason, his throat was dry. Celine's smirk softened slightly. Then, before he could react, she leaned in, pressed her lips against his. Soft. Certain. Unapologetic. Severus froze. Because for the first time in his life, someone kissed him. Celine pulled back, her eyes flicking over his expression. She grinned. Still busy. Severus inhaled, trying to force his brain to restart. He had been cursed, hexed, and thrown across dueling platforms. And yet, nothing had ever knocked the air out of his lungs like that. He cleared his throat. I have training to finish. Celine chuckled, stepping back. I'll let you get back to it then. She turned to leave, but before disappearing through the doorway, she glanced over her shoulder. Next time, Shafiq, she smirked. Don't overthink it. And then, she was gone. Severus stared after her. Mind racing. Heart pounding. He ran a hand through his hair. Merlin. He was so screwed. A few weeks had passed since the Cirque du Combat workshop, but the murmurs about Severus had not diminished. His name had evolved from mere curiosity to something that commanded respect. Duelists were taking notice, some with intrigue, others with bitterness. Some issued subtle challenges, more aggressive spell work during practice matches, sharper remarks exchanged in passing. It wasn't outright animosity. Not yet. But he could sense it. A change was in the air. Previously, he had been the British exchange student, background noise, just another face in the crowd. Now he was a contender. The letter arrived just before dinner, slipping through the crack of the door with the crispness of freshly delivered parchment. It was neatly folded, the Ilvermorny dueling crest embossed in vibrant hues that caught the fading light. Severus flicked it open with mild curiosity, his heartbeat quickening slightly as he recognized the familiar, authoritative writing. Severus Shafik, report to my office at 7 p.m. Professor Harland. He exhaled, rolling the parchment between his fingers, feeling the weight of its implications. Professor Harland was a man of few words, and in his experience, those words carried significant weight. Ben, who had been casually reading over his shoulder, smirked with a hint of mischief. Took him long enough. Severus raised an eyebrow, glancing at his friend with a mix of surprise and intrigue. You knew this was coming? Jonas shrugged nonchalantly, his posture relaxed in contrast to the stirring tension in Severus's chest. We figured. Evie leaned in, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Harlan doesn't recruit just anyone, Shafik. It's a big deal. Severus frowned slightly, the term recruit echoing in his mind, raising a series of questions that buzzed just out of reach. Before he could voice his confusion, Jonas shifted in his seat, eyes glimmering with enthusiasm. He's been training us for the International U-17 dueling tournament. Severus stilled, processing the unexpected revelation. The notion of competing at such a high level sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, mingling excitement with the anxiety of anticipation. That was not what he had expected at all. Harlan's office was dimly lit, enveloped by the rich scent of parchment, leather, and traces of wood softly tinged with smoke. The atmosphere buzzed with an air of expectancy, as if the walls themselves were privy to secrets long held. Seated behind an imposing desk, the dueling instructor maintained a relaxed posture tempered by a gaze that was as sharp as a blade. His keen eyes seemed to miss nothing, a predator observing its prey. Before him stood Severus, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, waiting with bated breath for the confrontation to unfold. The silence stretched thin between them, filled only by the quiet rustle of paper and the distant ticking of a clock, marking each passing second. For a moment, Harlan simply regarded him, his expression inscrutable. Then, breaking the stillness, he spoke. You've been making waves, Shafik. Severus remained steady, his expression impassive. So I've heard. A slight curl appeared at the corners of Harlan's lips, the hint of amusement in his tone. How much of it do you think you deserve? Severus held Harlan's gaze unwaveringly. All of it. Silence settled in again, thick and charged with tension. Harlan finally let out a low chuckle, the sound reverberating off the walls. Good answer. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he studied Severus, dissecting him like a challenging puzzle. There was a shrewdness in his demeanor that suggested he had seen many like Severus before, but found the young man's potential enticing. You have skill, Harlan admitted, his voice a blend of admiration and critique. Instinct. But you're not refined. You've trained yourself into patterns that are inefficient. Severus felt a pulse of irritation at the assessment, his jaw tensing slightly under the scrutiny. Harlan's words flowed on. You've got the potential to be great, but you're still fighting with a British mindset. That won't cut it at the international level. Severus frowned, confused and defensive. What are you suggesting? With a deliberate motion, Harlan folded his hands, creating a barrier that subtly commanded attention. I want to see if you belong in my group. The air shifted, carrying with it a palpable tension that seemed to pull the very fabric of reality closer together. Harlan, with his piercing gaze, extended an invitation that felt as if it were laced with both promise and peril. He was offering Severus a seat at the table, a chance to be part of something larger than himself. Yet, as with all things valuable, there was a catch. There's only one way in, Harlan stated, his tone flat yet imbued with an undeniable gravity. You duel me. Severus stiffened at the pronouncement, his muscles taut as he processed the implications of Harlan's words. This was not merely a challenge issued in the heat of bravado. It was a test designed to probe the depths of his character and resolve. Each word hung in the air, heavy with expectation, and Severus felt the familiar stirrings of determination within him. He had faced many trials before, each one refining his will and fortitude. This moment was no different. With a steely resolve etched across his face, Severus understood one thing: he would never back down from a test. The training hall was silent as Severus stepped onto the dueling platform, the air thick with unspoken tension. The polished wooden floor gleamed under the overhead lights, its surface reflecting the determination etched on Severus' face. Across from him, Professor Harlan stood with the easy confidence of a seasoned warrior who had faced countless adversaries. He was relaxed, his wand hanging loosely at his side, giving no indication of the skills he possessed. But Severus, keenly aware of the unyielding strength before him, was not deceived. This wasn't arrogance on Harlan's part, it was deep-rooted certainty. Severus could sense that the professor had fought this fight before, with experiences nestled in his very being. While Harlan seemed unfazed, Severus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew he needed to prepare. He had to summon all of his focus and skill. The room was empty save for a few familiar faces. Ben, Jonas, Evie, and Celine, standing at the edge of the platform, their eyes fixed intently on the duel about to unfold. Their support, though silent, wrapped around him like a comforting shroud. Damian Connors had also joined the group, his arms crossed and his sharp gaze filled with unmistakable interest. The intensity of their scrutiny was palpable, mingling with the silence and amplifying the anticipation in the room. Severus rolled his shoulders, shaking off any lingering doubt. He had dueled countless times before in the heat of competition and under the light of scrutiny, but never like this. This was more than just a test of skill. It was a moment of reckoning, and he was wholly aware that he had to rise to meet it. Harlan launched into action without the slightest delay, embodying the very essence of readiness. There was no moment of hesitation, no warning to telegraph his intentions. The instant the duel commenced, he propelled himself into an offensive flurry that was as sudden as it was aggressive. His speed was staggering, a blur of motion that left little room for response. Severus, caught off guard by the onslaught, had scarcely begun to move when Harlan's assault was already underway. A swift, non-verbal Expelliarmus was his opening salvo, targeting Severus's wand arm with lethal accuracy. This was quickly followed by a stunning hex, unleashed before Severus could mount a proper defense against the initial attack. With a swift sidestep born of instinct and years of training, Severus narrowly evaded the brunt of the first spell. He managed to deflect the disarming jinx with a deft flick of his wand, but the respite was brief. Harlan's relentless onslaught continued unabated, each spell flowing seamlessly into the next, a testament to his formidable skill. Severus uttered an incantation, his voice sharp and clear, "Protego." A protective shield materialized before him, but it was only partially effective. Harlan's magical prowess pierced through the defense as though it were mere illusion, the force of his spell shattering Severus's shield in an instant. The impact sent Severus reeling, his back foot sliding across the ground as he fought to maintain his balance. His mind whirred, thoughts racing as he sought to anticipate Harlan's next move, but there was no discernible pattern to predict. Harlan was not just a senior in years and experience. He was a force of nature, his every movement a display of superior strength, precision, and fluidity. Each curse and hex from Harlan's wand was a stroke of deadly artistry, a relentless cascade that allowed Severus no opportunity to counter. It was all he could do to keep from being overwhelmed, his every action one of survival as he contended with the ferocious skill of his opponent. Severus's heart pounded in his chest, a staccato rhythm that matched the desperate pace of his thoughts. He had never felt this exposed, this vulnerable in a duel. Every move he made seemed to lag, as if he were mired in some invisible quagmire. His counters were not just slow, they were sluggish, as though the air itself resisted his intentions. His footwork, once a source of pride, now felt leaden and all too predictable, a pattern easily read and just as easily countered. His casting, once crisp and precise, had become rigid, each incantation a formulaic recitation devoid of the fluidity that spells required to truly sing. And Harlan? Harlan was a tempest of controlled chaos, a stark contrast to Severus's meticulous attempts at strategy. Harlan wasn't even trying yet, or so it seemed. His movements were fluid where Severus's were stilted, his magic a natural extension of his will. "You fight like a student," Harland observed, his voice calm and almost clinical as he sidestepped another of Severus's cursed chains with an ease that bordered on contempt. The next shield Severus conjured shattered under an effortless swipe of Harland's wand, the fragments of light scattering like leaves in a gale. Severus set his jaw, frustration seething within him. "I am a student," he retorted, his voice a low growl. Harland's smirk was a slash of condescension. "Then stop fighting like one." Before Severus could decipher the true meaning behind Harland's taunt, the older duelist was upon him, a blur of motion that ended with Severus's legs being swept from under him. He crashed onto the dueling floor, the impact jarring his senses. He rolled instinctively, narrowly avoiding a sizzling spell that charred the ground where he had lain a heartbeat before. But Harland's onslaught was relentless. A hex, alien and unfamiliar, detonated beside Severus, the concussive force knocking him askew and disrupting his equilibrium. Severus Snape's robes were in disarray, the fabric shredded from the intensity of the duel. A powerful spell had forced him to his knee, the impact knocking the wind out of him. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw in air, each breath a harsh rasp in the eerily silent room. Severus had not merely lost. He had been resoundingly defeated. The battle had been fierce and unyielding, a testament to the skill and power of his adversary. The potent magic that had flooded the room left no doubt in his mind that he had been outmatched from the start. As he knelt there, the bitter taste of defeat filled his mouth, a taste more vile than any potion he had ever concocted. His pride, always his greatest weakness, lay in tatters beside his torn robes. The realization of his failure weighed heavily upon him. Harland stood motionless, the tip of his wand dipping toward the ground as he relaxed his stance. His breathing was steady, a stark contrast to the ragged gasps of his opponent. Severus Snape, sprawled on the ground, struggled to rise, his chest heaving with the exertion of their duel. The pride that Severus had carried into the fight was now a smoldering ember, overshadowed by the stark realization of his defeat. Severus's mind churned with questions. How had Harland outmaneuvered him at every turn? What had he overlooked? Harland's voice, calm and measured, cut through his turbulent thoughts. "You fight like someone who has never faced true combat," Harland observed, his eyes assessing Severus with an unsettling clarity. A surge of frustration gripped Severus, his fingers convulsing around the shaft of his wand. Yet, he knew the anger was misplaced. It was not Harland he was furious with, but himself. Harland's critique continued, each word a precise cut. "You possess skill, power, and undeniable potential. But the essence of combat eludes you. You're a practitioner of theory, not a master of the art." Severus's jaw tightened, the sting of Harland's words compounding the bitter taste of failure. It wasn't the technique that was lacking, it was his entire approach to the duel. "You wait too long, anticipating the perfect moment that never comes," Harland pointed out, his tone growing more instructive. "You must learn to seize the initiative, to shape the flow of battle rather than merely react to it." Severus released a sharp breath, his heart pounding in his ears. Harland's insights struck deep, resonating with the silent doubts Severus had harbored about his own abilities. "And your counters," Harland added, his gaze never wavering. "You expend too much energy, trying to overpower rather than outthink. You need to be smarter, more economical with your strength." Harland's critique hung in the air, a stern reminder of Severus's shortcomings. "You rely too much on structure," he chided, his voice echoing in the spacious training hall. "You hesitate between attacks, waiting for an opening instead of creating one. And you overcommit to counters instead of taking control of the battle." Severus felt the sting of those words, his chest tightening as his pulse thrummed in his ears. He drew in a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. It was true, he often found himself caught in a cycle of reaction, always one step behind. "You have talent, Shafik." Harland's tone softened slightly, though his gaze remained piercing as he scrutinized Severus. "But talent alone is useless if you can't adapt to the ever-changing tides of combat." The weight of the moment pressed down on Severus. He knew Harland was right. He had seen others with less raw ability surpass him through sheer adaptability. Determination welled up within him, and he lifted his eyes to meet Harland's. "So teach me," he said, his voice firm and resolute. A glimmer of approval sparked in Harlan's eyes, and a small smirk played on his lips. "Good answer," he replied, the faintest hint of a nod signaling the beginning of a new chapter in Severus's training. Severus had not emerged victorious, but the outcome of the contest was inconsequential to his current circumstances. The decision had been made, and it was one that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of his life. Harlan's voice, firm and resolute, cut through the tense silence. "You'll be training with me," he declared. Alongside Jonas, Ben, Evie, and Damien, Severus's eyes darted reflexively to the periphery, where the quartet of his soon-to-be comrades observed the unfolding scene with varying degrees of curiosity and anticipation. Damien, in particular, fixed him with a knowing smirk, the kind that spoke of shared secrets and camaraderie forged in the crucible of impending trials. "Welcome to the real fight, Shafiq," Damien intoned, a subtle nod acknowledging Severus's unspoken trepidation and excitement. Yet, the announcements were not yet complete. Harlan cleared his throat, and the room fell into a hushed expectancy. Celine will be joining as well. A jolt shot through Severus, tension coiling in his muscles as he processed the implications of Harlan's words. Slowly, with a deliberation that belied his inner turmoil, Severus turned his head to confront the latest addition to their ranks. Celine Everett, her golden eyes alight with an infuriatingly impish glee, regarded him with an expression that was all too smug. "Looks like we'll be seeing a lot more of each other," she remarked, her voice a silken thread weaving through the charged atmosphere. Severus released a measured breath through his nose, an attempt to maintain an outward veneer of calm. The weight of the challenges ahead pressed upon him, and for a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to utter a silent plea for guidance. "Merlin, grant him the strength and wisdom to navigate this new beginning and emerge not just unscathed, but triumphant." Severus wasn't going to wait for Harlan's official training sessions to start, unlike his peers, who celebrated after they were selected. Jonas and Ben enthusiastically dragged Evie and Damien to the common room, exuberant laughter echoing as they went. Alessandro, despite an earnest effort, failed to persuade Severus to join them, and even Celine cast him a meaningful glance before melting into the churning crowd. Severus chose a different path entirely. He made his way directly to his concealed training room, a sanctuary where he could focus without distractions. He began a relentless practice, meticulously retracing each movement Harlan had executed against him during their duel. The memory replayed in his mind like a relentless loop, each replay illuminating the flaws in his technique he had overlooked in the heat of the battle. He ran through spell sequences, increasing his speed with each iteration, determined to force himself into casting under pressure. No longer would he allow himself to be reactive only when he had time to calculate. This time, he pushed to respond instinctively. He closed his eyes, attempting to tap into wandless magic, a skill he knew would elevate his abilities. He envisioned the energy flowing through him, but instead of feeling the familiar surge of power, he encountered only a wall, an insurmountable block in his mind, stifling his efforts. Frustration welled up within him, and his jaw clenched tightly. It simply wasn't enough. He wasn't enough. The stark reality of Harlan's superiority weighed heavily on him. In their duel, Harlan had dissected his every move with surgical precision, exploiting every gap in Severus's defenses. The critical difference between them had not been sheer strength. Severus had that in abundance. It was experience that had set Harlan apart. While Severus reacted with instinct and brute force, Harlan maneuvered with calculated intent. He didn't merely cast spells faster. He cast them intelligently, weaving a web that ensnared Severus before he even realized he was being drawn into it. Each incantation flowed seamlessly into the next, creating a relentless onslaught that left Severus cornered and struggling for control, the weight of his inadequacies pressing down on him. With every passing moment, Severus vowed silently to himself that he would not fall short again. He would rise above this challenge, transforming weakness into strength. Severus exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his muscles as he rolled his shoulders. The realization settled in. If he was going to stand a chance with this new group, He needed to evolve beyond his current limitations. No more relying on rigid technique that left him predictable. No more telegraph counters that gave his opponents ample warning. No more hesitation that could cost him precious seconds in a confrontation. Yet, as the hours dragged on, a creeping frustration refused to dissipate. His movements had grown sharper, more decisive. His spell work was clean and precise, reflecting a determination to improve. But despite his efforts, he still wasn't where he needed to be. A sense of urgency surged within him. He had to break through to shatter the boundaries that held him back. He had to. "You're thinking too much again." The voice cut through his concentration, and Severus froze mid-thought, his mind reeling. Then, reluctantly, he turned to face the source of the interruption. She lingered in the threshold, her arms folded defiantly across her chest, golden eyes alight with both mirth and an edge of challenge. There she was, undeniable and as commanding as a tempest that had been building on the horizon for far too long. Selene Everett. Her arrival was like the first drop of rain before a downpour. Inescapable, imposing, and carrying with it an air of anticipated turbulence. Severus released a deep, resigned sigh. "If you're here to be a distraction, I don't have the patience for it," he stated, his tone carrying an unmistakable sharpness. A smirk played on Selene's lips, as if she were privy to a secret jest. "Who said I was a distraction?" she retorted, her voice a silky thread weaving through the tension. With an almost languid grace, she uncrossed her arms and pushed away from the wall, her steps a study in nonchalance that belied the precision beneath. She moved with the easy confidence of a predator, her approach a calculated dance towards the object of her interest. Severus, feeling the prickle of a challenge, rolled his shoulders in a bid to release the mounting tension. "Then what do you want?" he asked, his voice steady but betraying a hint of curiosity. Selene paused, tilting her head in an exaggerated show of contemplation. "Perhaps," she began, drawing out the suspense, "I wanted to see you frustrated." Severus met her gaze with an unimpressed stare. "Then consider your wish granted," he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching, and it might have been the shadow of a smile. Her laughter was light, a stark contrast to the simmering atmosphere. "You always this fun after getting your arse handed to you?" she teased, her words a playful jab. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, the only sign of his irritation. "I'm training," he clarified, the statement a low growl. "So train with me," Selene proposed, her invitation hanging in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Severus remained motionless, his thoughts tumbling over one another in a frantic rush. The audacity of her action had successfully captured his focus. As he stood there, an anticipatory silence enveloping them, she suddenly propelled herself forward with a swift and decisive movement. Her abrupt lunge pierced the stillness, leaving Severus no time to voice the question that had begun to form on his lips regarding her intentions. In the heat of their clandestine training, wands lay discarded, their magical prowess rendered obsolete. This was a realm governed by sheer instinct, where intellect and spell work bowed to the primal dance of combat. Selene was the first to engage, her movements a blur of swift precision that compelled Severus to respond with raw reflex rather than calculated strategy. She danced around him, her assault as fluid and relentless as a raging river, her patterns impossible to anticipate. Just when Severus thought he had grasped her rhythm, she would pivot, sliding from his reach as effortlessly as a shadow fleeing the sun. Her attacks were fierce, unleashed with a savage intensity that left no room for second-guessing. She drove Severus back, forcing him to adopt a defensive stance, his every counter thwarted by her nimble evasions. Her eyes sparkled with an unmistakable joy, betraying her love for the fray. It was as if the duel was a form of expression for her, a language in which she was eloquently fluent. Severus, on the other hand, found himself at a disadvantage once more. It was a bitter pill to swallow, watching his efforts to gain the upper hand crumble under the weight of her superior agility. She was playing with him, measuring his responses with a cat's curiosity. Each time he lunged, she would slip through his fingers like a wisp of mist, her laughter a soft melody that mocked his misses. This was not merely a display of her combat prowess, it was Selene embodied. Her playfulness, her tenacity, her elusive nature that made her both enthralling and maddeningly untouchable. With a swift and seemingly effortless move, she claimed her triumph. It was a subtle signal, a graceful action that disrupted Severus's equilibrium. In that moment, victory was hers. With a mere flick of her wrist, a delicate twist of her body, she threw Severus off kilter. Caught off guard, he teetered on the edge of balance, desperately trying to regain his footing. But she was too quick, too precise in her movements. Lemon warning. If you are not interested in listening to this section, feel free to skip to the time shown on the screen. Before Severus could steady himself, she acted with an audacity that took his breath away. Her lips met his in a kiss that was neither tentative nor bashful. It was bold and intentional, a statement of her victory, a sealing of the moment that left no room for misinterpretation. Her actions spoke volumes, declaring her dominance with a clarity that resonated in the silence that followed. The world around Severus seemed to shift suddenly, as if the very earth had tilted on its axis. In that moment, Celine's lips met his, conveying a warmth and determination that caught him completely off guard. Severus stood rigid, his body betraying a startling immediacy of response to the unexpected kiss. A jolt of heat seared through him, igniting a current of raw, electric desire just beneath the surface of his skin. His hands, acting on pure instinct, began to reach out, seeking something. Anything to anchor himself to reality. But then, a flicker of cognizance cut through the haze of surprise. This was unfamiliar territory. He was unprepared for such an intimate encounter, unprepared for the way his heart pounded and his thoughts scrambled in a desperate attempt to catch up with his senses. Celine, on the other hand, seemed entirely in control. She did not hastily retreat after the kiss. Instead, she lingered in the space between them, close enough that Severus could feel the whisper of her breath still playing across his lips, could recall the exact pressure of her fingers clutching his arm, could detect the subtle humor in her quiet exhalation. With a force of will, Severus kept his hands at his sides. His body and mind were at odds, a civil war waged within him. The desire for Celine was undeniable, a physical pull that introduced him to sensations he had never before experienced. Yet, part of him clung to tradition, to the expectations of relationships and the proprieties of courtship that he had always taken for granted. She was nothing more than an acquaintance, and this sudden intimacy cast doubts in his mind. Was this a mere game to her? A test of his resolve? Before Severus could spiral into overanalysis, Celine broke the silence with a soft, melodic hum, her head cocked to one side as she regarded him with a knowing gaze. "You're thinking too much again, Shafik," she chided gently, her voice a soft reprimand that resonated in the space between them. Severus swallowed hard, his voice emerging rough and unsteady. "What do you want?" he asked. Celine's lips curled into a knowing smirk, her eyes gleaming with a mischievous light. She leaned in slightly, her gaze locked onto his, reading the unspoken questions that danced in his eyes. "You already know the answer to that," she murmured, her voice a soft melody that seemed to resonate with the quiet tension in the air. Her hand reached out, her fingers cool and delicate as they encircled his shoulders. "Stop thinking," she whispered, her breath a warm caress against his ear. Her voice was a low, sultry purr, teasing and coaxing, a siren's call that beckoned him to let go of his restraint. "Just follow what your body wants," she urged, her tone a blend of command and invitation. It was as if she were guiding him through a dance only they knew, her words the music to which their rhythm was set. Her touch, her voice, the very atmosphere around her seemed to conspire, enveloping him in a world where only their desires existed. Severus's fingers twitched reflexively, an almost imperceptible motion that belied the tempest brewing within him. It would be so easy to let go, to release the iron grip he had always maintained on his emotions, his desires. So easy to stop thinking, to stop questioning, to let his instincts take over. And for the first time in his two lives, he lost control. When Celine leaned in again, her intentions clear in the depths of her golden eyes, he met her halfway. Their lips collided in something far hungrier, more demanding than before. There was no hesitation this time, no tentative exploration. She kissed him like she wanted him, like she had always wanted him, and now that she had him, she wasn't letting go. It was as if she were trying to make up for lost time, For every moment they had danced around this inevitable conclusion. Severus responded before he could second-guess himself, his hands moving of their own accord to find her waist. He pulled her closer, the warmth of her body seeping into his through the layers of their clothing. The sensation was grounding and electrifying all at once, a paradox that made his heart race with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. Celine let out a soft, pleased hum against his lips, a sound that sent shivers down his spine and emboldened him further. She deepened the kiss, her fingers sliding up his chest with a surety that left him breathless. They curled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer as if she couldn't get enough of him. Heat coiled low in his stomach, a fire ignited by the friction between them. It licked at the edges of his restraint, threatening to consume the carefully constructed barriers he had built around his heart. This was dangerous, stepping into territory that was both unfamiliar and forbidden. It was intoxicating, the taste of her, the feel of her in his arms. It was everything he had never allowed himself to want. And in that moment of unbridled passion, Severus realized that Celine was not just a challenge or a rival to be bested. She was a force of nature, a tempest that had swept into his life and redefined the very essence of what it meant to be alive. Her kiss was a revelation, a tantalizing glimpse into a world where rules were meant to be broken, where the heart's desires reigned supreme over logic and reason. But as their embrace deepened, a flicker of doubt crept into the corners of Severus's mind. He had always prided himself on his discipline, his ability to maintain control in the face of adversity. Yet here he was, losing himself in the heat of the moment, surrendering to impulses that he had spent years suppressing. Was this a sign of growth, a necessary shedding of old skins, or was it a dangerous descent into chaos? Celine seemed to sense the shift in him, the subtle withdrawal as his thoughts threatened to intrude upon the sanctity of their connection. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her gaze piercing and perceptive. "Don't," she whispered, her voice a soft plea that cut through his introspection. "Don't overthink this. Not now." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that for once, he could allow himself to simply be. To exist in a moment that was theirs and theirs alone, free from the weight of expectations and the relentless pursuit of perfection. With a ragged breath, Severus nodded, his hands finding their way back to her, tracing the contours of her face with a tenderness that surprised them both. Celine offered him a smile, her hand reaching up to stroke his cheek. He leaned in, his breath hot against her neck as he kissed her. This was what she wanted. His strong hands encircled her waist, walking her back to the corner of the room, lifting her onto the couch. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer. The room spun around them as they lost themselves in the moment, their bodies pressing tightly against each other. With a gentle push, she laid him back onto the couch cushions and began to undo the buttons of his shirt. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her determination, but he said nothing, only nodded for her to continue. Her hands revealed the hard planes of his chest. His skin was warm and rough, a stark contrast to her own. As she straddled him, she could feel the tension in the air thickening, the anticipation of what was about to happen making her heart race even faster. With a final, deep kiss, she slid off the couch and stood up, reaching behind her to unzip the dress. His eyes followed her every movement, filled with a desire she had never seen directed at her before. The power she held over him in this moment was intoxicating. As she looked down at Severus, his gaze met hers, a mixture of confusion and desire swirling in their depths. "I want you," she whispered, her fingers tracing the outline of his lips. Severus reached out, pulling her back down onto the couch, their bodies once again entwined in a desperate embrace. The world around them melted away, leaving only their ragged breaths and the pounding of their hearts to fill the silence. As they explored each other's bodies with an almost feral intensity, she reached for his belt, unbuckled it and unzipped his pants, pulling them garment down to free him completely. His arousal sprung forth, hot and demanding against her bare skin. She felt a surge of anticipation as she positioned herself over him, their bodies aligned in an ancient dance as old as time itself. Sometime later, the dim glow of the enchanted lantern cast a warm hue over the forgotten guest quarters, its faint light dancing across the walls and shadows playing in the corners. Severus reclined on the worn couch, his body weighed down by a mix of physical exhaustion and a profound sense of satisfaction that was new and unfamiliar to him. Yet, Beneath these layers, a flicker of an unnamed emotion stirred, elusive and unsettling. Celine lounged across him, her form relaxed and untroubled, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing within him. Her golden eyes, half-veiled by heavy lids, observed him with an almost predatory calm. The smirk that graced her lips seemed to be a permanent fixture, a silent testament to her contentment and perhaps a hint of triumph. Of course, she would be smug. It was her nature to revel in her victories, no matter how small or personal. Severus released a measured breath, willing his thoughts to coalesce amidst the chaos of the evening's events. "You're dangerous, Everett," he murmured, the words slipping out before he could weigh their significance. A low chuckle escaped Celine as she shifted to prop herself up on one elbow, her gaze never leaving his. "I could say the same about you, Shafiq," she replied, her voice a sultry whisper that seemed to resonate with the undercurrents of their shared tension. Her fingers began to explore, tracing delicate, meandering paths across his chest with a familiarity that belied their brief acquaintance. Each touch sent ripples of warmth through him, and he couldn't help but marvel at the audacity of her actions, the certainty with which she claimed her desire. In the quiet that ensued, Severus found himself studying her, drinking in the vision of her laid beside him, her tousled hair, the soft curve of her lips, the graceful line of her neck. She was beauty incarnate, a siren call to his senses, and yet there was an edge to her, a wildness that both intrigued and terrified him. She was nothing but trouble, the kind that left a trail of chaos in her wake. In Merlin's bloody beard, Severus knew he was already in too deep, entangled in the web that was Celine. She stretched languidly, a cat basking in the sun, utterly at ease in her own skin. Turning to face him, her gaze pierced through him like an arrow, sending an unexpected jolt of electricity through his chest. "I meant what I said before," Celine declared, her voice a sultry melody that seemed to resonate in the air between them. Severus remained silent, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to say, how he was meant to respond to such a bold confession. Words failed him, leaving him adrift in the sea of her enticing certainty. Celine, ever the enigma, leaned in closer, her lips brushing against his in a final, lingering kiss. It was slow, teasing, a kiss that spoke of promises and secrets yet to be unveiled. As she pulled away, her smirk was a challenge, a tantalizing invitation. "I want you," she murmured, the words hanging between them, potent and undeniable. Severus inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of her desire like a physical force. Before he could gather his thoughts to form a coherent response, she continued, her tone laced with mischief and resolve. "And I want to keep doing this," Celine stated, her eyes locked onto his, daring him to disagree. There was no hesitation in her voice, no room for doubt or second-guessing. It was a statement, clear and unwavering. A proposal, bold and unapologetic. A line drawn in the sands of their complicated lives, a demarcation between what had been and what could be. Severus's eyelids fluttered in a slow, deliberate blink, the motion punctuating the quiet exhale that escaped his nostrils. His voice, when he spoke, carried a weight of resignation. "You don't want anything serious," he stated, his words hanging in the air like a verdict awaiting its sentence. Celine's response was a playful grin, a flash of white teeth against the soft moonlight that filtered through the window. Her eyes sparkled with an impish delight that seemed to light up the room more than the stars outside. "Not right now." "Not yet," she replied, her tone laced with a mischievous anticipation. "But that doesn't mean we can't have some fun." Severus knew he should have been wary. Every fiber of his being had been honed to detect and analyze threats, to anticipate consequences. But in that moment, the fortress of his caution lay in ruins, its walls breached by the siege of her allure. He wasn't thinking, a rare lapse in judgment for one so meticulous. And so, for once, he let himself enjoy it. He allowed the warmth of her presence to wash over him, a tidal wave of sensation that threatened to sweep away his resolve. Celine sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist as she ran a hand through her dark curls. They sprang back into place, a testament to their unruly nature, as she rose from the bed with a fluid grace that belied her strength. "See you at training, Shafiq," she said, using his first name in a way that felt both intimate and challenging. Then, With the same ease with which she did everything, she was gone, leaving behind only the faintest trace of her perfume and the echo of her laughter. Severus lay there, his gaze fixed on the ceiling above. His mind, usually a whirlwind of thoughts and plans, was uncharacteristically blank, a canvas wiped clean by the turbulence of their encounter. His body, however, sang a different tale, a symphony of heat that coursed through his veins, a reminder of the passion that had so recently been ignited. Merlin's bloody beard, he hissed through clenched teeth, a sense of dread washing over him. He realized with a sinking heart that he had maneuvered himself into an intractable predicament. The walls of the ancient, dimly lit chamber seemed to close in around him, amplifying his feelings of entrapment. With each labored breath, the gravity of his situation became increasingly clear. He had been so confident in his plan, so certain of his path, but now the threads of fate appeared to be woven into a tapestry of his own undoing. Severus found himself adrift in a sea of confusion, with emotions he could not readily identify. Certainly, it was not regret that he felt, yet neither was it the crispness of understanding. His body harbored the vivid memories, the warmth that had permeated his skin, the electric touch of lips, and the sensation of Selene in his embrace, her form fitting so perfectly against him. Her smirk after they parted still haunted him, a clear sign of her unflappable demeanor starkly contrasting his own turmoil. He had always been adept at the game of power, skillfully navigating the intricate web of alliances and rivalries. Self-control had been his steadfast ally, a trait honed over years of discipline. But the recent events had plunged him into a realm he had never anticipated exploring. In the familiar passageways of Ilvermorny, Severus moved as if in a trance, his mind ensnared by a relentless cycle of analysis. Every gesture, every whispered word from that night paraded through his thoughts, each scrutinized for hidden meaning. Control and discipline had been the twin pillars upon which he built his life. Yet, that night, something within him had shifted, allowing him to relinquish his iron grip on restraint for the first time in either of his incarnations. Now, as he emerged from the haze of those experiences, uncertainty loomed before him. What was to come, he could not foresee. The path ahead was shrouded in an unfamiliar mist, and for perhaps the first time, Severus acknowledged the disconcerting allure of the unknown. Severus pushed open the door to his dorm, the familiar creak echoing in his ears as he stepped inside. The tension of the day seemed to evaporate, but it was quickly replaced by a different kind of alertness. Alessandro's voice, eager and tinged with mild concern, greeted him the instant the door clicked shut. "There you are, finally. Thought you got yourself hexed in a dark alley somewhere. I was about to put up missing posters." Severus released a weary sigh, his fingers finding the familiar contours of his head, pressing against the onset of a headache. Across the room, Alessandro was perched on Severus's bed, an open book teetering on his lap. The book, its pages filled with complex diagrams and dense text, was titled Advanced Hex Countermeasures. Alessandro's eyes flicked up momentarily, acknowledging Severus's arrival before diving back into the book. "So, you'll never believe what happened today," he began, but the words died on his lips as he truly looked at his friend. His eyebrows knitted together in a look of confusion, and his eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Severus with an intensity that made the younger wizard feel as though he were a puzzle to be solved. Alessandro's gaze traveled the length of Severus, taking in every detail with the precision of a potion master examining his ingredients. Then, with an unsettling swiftness, Alessandro's expression shifted to one of amusement. "Merlin's balls. You have the glow of satisfaction on your face." Severus's heart skipped a beat. His hands, which had been reaching to place his wand on the bedside table, halted in midair. The room fell silent, save for the soft rustle of pages as Alessandro closed his book, his smirk growing ever wider. "Oh, shit. That was a joke," Alessandro started, but as he watched Severus's reaction, or rather, the lack of one, realization dawned on him. Wait, you're telling me I was right?" Severus fixed him with a withering glare, the kind that could make paint peel from the walls. Yet, even as he tried to maintain his composure, a ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, an involuntary betrayal of his feelings. He knew that Alessandro, with his uncanny ability to read people, would not be fooled by a mere glare. Alessandro's eyes widened comically, and he shot up from the bed. the book tumbling to the floor with a thud that seemed to echo the pounding of Severus's heart. I knew it. There's been something different about you since the last couple of days. You've been off, distracted, and now it all makes sense. Severus turned away, feigning interest in the arrangement of his potion vials on the shelf, hoping the mundane task would steady his nerves. Your imagination is as overactive as ever, Alessandro, he said, his voice steady despite the tempest brewing within. Imagination? I'm rarely wrong about these things, Alessandro retorted, circling Severus like a predator closing in on its prey. Who is she? Or is it a he? No judgment here. Spill the beans, Severus. I can see it in your aura or whatever you call it. There's a love potion at work here, and I'm not just talking about the ones we brew in class. Severus's mind raced. He had never been one for sharing his personal life, and yet the desire to confide in someone, to make sense of his own jumbled emotions, was overwhelming. He could trust Alessandro, couldn't he? The two had shared enough secrets to fill a library of confidential documents. With a resigned sigh, Severus turned to face his friend, the walls he had built over the years crumbling just a fraction. It's complicated, he admitted, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. And it's not a love potion. It's real. Alessandro's grin softened into a smile of genuine warmth. Complicated is my middle name, my friend. Now, sit down and tell me everything. And I mean everything. Start with the part where you actually smile. A real one. Not one of your I've just discovered a new way to curse someone smiles. I want all the juicy details. Severus rolled his eyes, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice as he spoke. You're insufferable, you know that? He sat down on the edge of his bed, the stiffness in his posture betraying his discomfort with the conversation. It's not something I'm accustomed to discussing. Alessandro sat across from him, crossing his legs and leaning forward with an eager expression. Well, get accustomed to it, he said, his tone playful yet firm. You can't drop a bomb like that and not expect some collateral damage. Now, out with it. Who is this enchantress who's managed to bewitch the great Severus Shafik? Severus's gaze rolled skyward, yet he refrained from his usual dismissive retort. With a reluctant air, he perched on the edge of his bed, his back ramrod straight, a silent testament to his discomfort with the situation at hand. Alessandro, with a fluidity that contrasted Severus's stiffness, dropped onto the other bed, crossing his legs and leaning in with an eagerness that couldn't be feigned. I can wait all night, he teased, though his tone held an underlying firmness. You can't drop a bomb like that and expect me not to demand answers. So who is she? Severus released a long-suffering sigh, the sound heavy with resignation. Celine Everett, he revealed, the name hanging in the air like a challenge. Alessandro's eyes widened momentarily before he let out a low, impressed whistle. Oh, damn. He leaned back, a look of genuine surprise etched on his face. Severus arched a single eyebrow, the gesture eloquently conveying his annoyance. That reaction is unnecessary. No, that reaction is absolutely necessary. Alessandro shot back, his enthusiasm undiminished. Everett is, well, she's Celine Everett. She's as sharp as a tack, fearless to a fault. And, let's be honest, a bit of a pain in the ass. But that's what makes her fascinating. She doesn't waste her time on people she doesn't find interesting. And if she's interested in you, Severus, then you've certainly caught her eye for a reason. Severus remained still, fighting the discomfort that comes with being under intense examination. She approached me, he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. She was adamant that she wasn't interested in anything long-term. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. And what about you, Severus? He asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. Severus's gaze dropped to the floor, his thoughts tumbling like the pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Honestly, he admitted after a moment of silence, I didn't think about it. He lifted his eyes to meet Alessandro's, a hint of vulnerability peeking through his usually stoic facade. For once, I didn't analyze or plan. I just acted. Alessandro's scrutiny didn't waver. He stood, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor breaking the stillness, and moved to a cabinet. From its depths, he produced 2 glasses and a bottle of fire whiskey, the amber liquid sloshing gently as he uncorked it. It was from his definitely not legal stash, a fact that hung unspoken between them. "Here," Alessandro said, extending a glass to Severus. The liquid inside caught the light, casting a warm glow. Severus eyed the offering with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "You're giving me alcohol?" Alessandro chuckled, a rare sound that seemed to put Severus more on edge. "You're having an existential crisis over what sounds like some pretty good sex. This," he gestured with his own glass, "is a bonding moment." With a roll of his eyes, Severus accepted the drink, the weight of the glass grounding in his hand. Alessandro mimicked his action, swirling the fire whiskey so that it clung to the sides of his glass in a slow, honeyed dance. "All right," Alessandro began, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Let's dissect this. It's clear you enjoyed it. But why are you letting it consume your thoughts?" Severus lifted the glass to his lips, allowing the liquid to glide over his tongue, the warmth spreading through his chest as he swallowed. He took a moment to savor the familiar burn before addressing the question that hung in the air between them. "Because I don't know what this means," he finally admitted, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. He set the glass down with deliberate care, his fingers lingering on the cool surface. She made it abundantly clear she wasn't looking for anything serious. He broke off, searching for the words that seemed to elude him. "I'm not accustomed to this kind of attention. It's uncharted territory for me, and I'm at a loss as to how I'm supposed to navigate it." Alessandro, ever the patient listener, nodded thoughtfully, his finger tracing an absent rhythm against the side of his own glass. "Perhaps you should consider why that is," he suggested, his tone gentle yet probing. Severus's brow furrowed at the question, his gaze dropping to the table as he mulled it over. "I've spent years honing my survival instincts, obsessing over power and outwitting those who constantly underestimated me. But now, for the first time, I'm faced with someone who isn't engaging in a game of chess. She's straightforward with her intentions, offering me exactly what she desires without pretense, and leaving the choice to reciprocate entirely up to me." A silence fell between them, punctuated only by the soft clink of glassware in the background. It was a silence that spoke volumes, for it was in this quiet that Severus acknowledged the crux of his dilemma. Celine, unlike anyone he had ever known, did not seek power or influence from their association. She simply wanted him, for who he was beyond the titles and the intimidation. And in the face of such genuine desire, Severus found himself adrift, with no strategy or countermove at his disposal. The realization was both disarming and, in a way he could not yet articulate, deeply compelling. Celine's disinterest in power and influence was glaringly obvious, a stark contrast to the ambitions that typically fueled the hearts of those in their circle. She harbored a desire far more carnal and, for Severus, disconcerting. She simply yearned for him, a notion that left him adrift in uncharted waters. Alessandro, ever the perceptive friend, sensed the turmoil brewing within Severus. With a sigh that carried the weight of his exasperation, he decided to impart some unsolicited advice. "Look, here's the thing, Caro," he began, his voice a blend of patience and candor. "If you're interested in her, then go for it. If not, then walk away. But don't stand there paralyzed, acting as if the heavens have fallen simply because you've experienced the intimacy you've long avoided." Severus's expression hardened into a mask of irritation, his gaze piercing as he retorted, "I hate you." It was a futile protest, one that failed to conceal the underlying truth of their bond. Undeterred by the barb, Alessandro responded with a knowing smirk. "No, you don't. You love me. I'm your best friend now, by default." His words were a gentle jab, acknowledging the shift in their dynamic, a shift Severus had been slow to accept. "Merlin, help me," Severus muttered under his breath, a plea for strength or perhaps a touch of humor in the face of Alessandro's relentless teasing. Alessandro's grin widened, his eyes alight with mischief and genuine concern. I'm just saying. If you want my expert opinion, it's clear you're attracted to her. She's obviously into you, and you've been running from the idea of someone desiring you without any ulterior motives. You're afraid of something real." Severus fell silent, his mind awhirl with the undeniable truth woven through Alessandro's words. The quiet that enveloped him was not one of disagreement but of contemplation, a silent acknowledgement of the crossroads he now faced. The choice before him was stark and simple. to either embrace the vulnerability that came with genuine affection or to retreat into the comfortable shadows of his former solitude. Alessandro, sensing the inner battle Severus waged, leaned forward, his voice softening. "Severus, you've always been the master of your own mind, the architect of your own destiny. But even you must admit that there's a certain beauty in allowing oneself to be affected by another. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Severus's eyes flickered with an unspoken recognition of the truth in Alessandro's statement. The rigidity of his posture softened ever so slightly, a subtle concession to the weight of his friend's counsel. "I've spent so long constructing walls," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, "that I've forgotten how to live beyond them." "Then perhaps it's time to start chipping away at those walls," Alessandro suggested, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You're not alone in this, Severus. You have friends who care about you. And maybe, just maybe, you've found someone who could care for you in ways you haven't even considered." The room settled into a profound silence, broken only by the soft symphony of the fireplace. Its warm flames conjured flickering shadows that danced across the walls like ethereal performers. Alessandro's words hung in the air, a stark reminder of an unsettling truth. He had, indeed, spent the breadth of his days striving to demonstrate his value, to earn a glance, a gesture of approval that might signify acceptance. But Celine, with her unassuming grace, had never imposed such conditions. She had desired him, not for what he could prove, but for the man he was. Alessandro leaned in with a playful smirk gracing his features. "So," he began, his voice laced with an irrepressible buoyancy, "are you going to torment yourself with overthinking until the end of days? Or will you allow yourself the simple pleasure of acknowledging that, perhaps for the first time, something in your life feels effortless?" Severus placed his glass gently onto the table, the clink of crystal barely audible over the hum of his thoughts. Slowly, the whirlwind of emotions and half-formed ideas began to coalesce into a semblance of order. It was in this moment of quiet clarity that he allowed himself to confront the undeniable truth that had been lurking in the shadows of his mind. He desired Celine, a realization that both exhilarated and unnerved him. But Severus was not a man to act on impulse. Control was the very bedrock upon which he had built his life. The notion of inviting someone into his world, even in the most casual of contexts, was a departure from his usual reserve. He knew that if he were to cross this threshold, he must do so with an abundance of caution. There could be no room for error, no possibility of misinterpreting the nature of their connection. Resolved, he decided that a conversation with Celine was necessary. He would lay out his thoughts and expectations with precision, ensuring that they both understood the boundaries of their association. This was not to be a prelude to romance. It would be a mutually agreed-upon alliance, free from the complexities of emotional entanglement. Severus drew in a deep breath, steeling himself for the discussion ahead. There would be no place for ambiguity. He would be clear about his intentions, and he would listen to hers. They needed to be of one mind, to prevent any hint of misunderstanding from taking root. The prospect of such a frank discussion was almost liberating. For once, Severus would permit himself to pursue something simply because it brought him a sense of desire. It was a foreign concept to him, to act on want rather than calculated need, but it was a challenge he was willing to face. With a sense of determination, he finally broke the silence. "I'll talk to her," he declared, more to himself than to anyone else. Across the room, Alessandro's face broke into a knowing grin. "That's all I needed to hear," he replied, recognizing the significance of Severus's decision. It was a rare moment of personal vulnerability for a man who was typically as impenetrable as stone, and Alessandro knew it marked the beginning of a new chapter in Severus's life. "Just remember, my friend, that life is rarely as black and white as the potions we brew. Emotions have a way of complicating things, but that's not always a bad thing." Severus nodded, a tacit acknowledgement of the wisdom in his friend's words. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, his voice carrying a newfound resolve. "Celine deserves honesty, and I intend to give her that, at the very least." Alessandro stood, stretching his arms above his head before offering Severus a supportive clap on the shoulder. "That's the spirit. Just be yourself, Severus. You're more than enough, even if you don't always see it." The two friends lingered in the room, the weight of the conversation settling around them like a comfortable blanket. Severus knew that the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of anticipation at the thought of what the future might hold. As Alessandro busied himself with tidying up the remnants of their impromptu counseling session, Severus found his thoughts drifting back to Selene. Her laughter, her unyielding confidence, and the way her eyes seemed to pierce through his defenses. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. With a final glance at Alessandro, Severus rose from his bed, his mind clearer than it had been in days. "Thank you," he said, the gratitude genuine and heartfelt. "For everything." Alessandro waved away the sentiment with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "What are friends for, if not to help navigate the treacherous waters of romance?" he joked, his tone lightening the mood. Severus allowed himself a small, wry smile before heading towards the door. "I'll see you in the morning," he said, stepping out into the corridor and closing the door behind him. The dormitory behind him was a sanctuary of camaraderie and advice, but the hallway ahead held the promise of possibility. With each step he took, Severus felt the stirrings of a life less constrained by his own expectations. Severus had spent the last day deep in thought, meticulously weighing his options as he prepared for what lay ahead. Alessandro had made his stance clear: stop overthinking and just enjoy it. But Severus knew himself all too well. His mind was not wired to embrace spontaneity. Meticulous planning and structure were essential to him. If he was going to embark on this new chapter, it had to be on his own terms, clear, methodical, and devoid of any uncertainty. That meant he had to have a conversation with Selene. He found her nestled in the Thunderbird common room, lounging with an air of relaxed confidence in one of the oversized chairs. She was engrossed in a book on advanced combat techniques, her golden eyes darting up to meet his as he approached, a familiar smirk already dancing on her lips. "Shafiq," she greeted, stretching her arms over her head with a languid grace. "Here to test my reflexes again?" Severus chose to ignore the playful jab, instead settling into the chair across from her, his expression turning serious. "We need to talk." Selene arched an eyebrow, closing her book with a deliberate slowness that suggested she was weighing her response carefully. "That sounds ominous," she remarked, her voice laced with curiosity and a hint of caution. Severus sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his unease. "It's not," he replied briskly, trying to mask the tension in his voice. "But can we go somewhere else and discuss this more privately?" He glanced around the room, as if afraid their conversation might be overheard, his intensity rising. Selene set her book aside, her playful demeanor evaporating in the face of his urgency. "All right, I'm intrigued," she said, rising from her seat with a practiced fluidity. She flashed him a quick, assessing look, as if gauging the gravity of the moment compared to their usual light-hearted exchanges. They made their way through the labyrinthine hallways of the Thunderbird dormitory, the air thick with unspoken words. Severus led the way, though uncertainty flickered in his mind like a flickering candle flame. Finally, they reached a secluded dueling room, far removed from the hustle of their peers. As the door clicked shut behind them, a heavy silence enveloped the room. "Listen," he began, his voice steadier now, though an undercurrent of tension lingered. "I can't approach this without clarity." He met her gaze with unwavering intensity. "I'm not used to this." Selene's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Sex?" Severus rolled his eyes in exasperation. "Casual relationships." She chuckled softly, tilting her head in bemusement. "Go on." "I need clarity," he pressed on, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you expect from this? What are the boundaries we should set? And what happens if either of us decides this isn't working?" Her amusement softened, and something more genuine flickered in her expression, revealing a glimpse of understanding. "You really are a horned serpent," she murmured, her tone teasing yet sincere. "Always thinking 5 steps ahead." Severus remained silent, his gaze fixed on her, waiting for her to respond. Selene leaned back in her chair, her fingers rhythmically tapping against her thigh, a subtle sign of her contemplation. "All right, here's how I see it," she began, her voice steady and clear. "No expectations. This isn't about emotions or commitment. We have to be honest right from the start. If either of us feels the need to end this, we need to be upfront about it. No drama. If things start to get complicated, we'll agree to walk away before it turns into something messy." She held his gaze firmly, ensuring he understood the weight of her words. Does that sound fair to you? Severus regarded her with careful intensity, weighing her words thoughtfully. He wasn't naive. Selene Everett was an enigma, confident, reckless, and impossible to pin down. Her unpredictable nature intrigued him, and her straightforwardness was a welcome change. Unlike the Slytherins back home, who played mind games and reveled in deception, Selene was refreshingly direct in her approach to conversations and relationships. He kept his expression neutral, giving a slow nod. Fair. Selene's smirk widened, a hint of mischief dancing in her eyes. Good. Glad we got that sorted. Now let's seal the deal with a kiss. In the quiet, secluded dueling room, away from the prying eyes and ears of their peers, Severus felt an unexpected surge of anticipation. His heart pounded against his chest, a testament to his willingness to take this leap. He understood the terms that Selene had laid out: no emotions, no commitment, and honesty above all else. It was a plan that appealed to his cautious Slytherin nature. As Selene leaned in, her golden eyes locked on his, he met her gaze unwaveringly. Her lips were mere inches from his as she whispered, "Are you ready, Shafiq?" Severus took a deep breath, allowing himself a flicker of anticipatory excitement. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, a tantalizing promise of what was to come. With a nod, he sealed their agreement. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. The contact sent a shiver down his spine, a mixture of nerves and desire. As they deepened the kiss, the initial hesitation gave way to an intense, exhilarating connection. He could taste the sweetness of her lips and the faint hint of ambition that seemed to fuel her very essence. As they pulled away, their breaths mingling in the still air, Selene's smirk was triumphant. "Welcome to the agreement, Shafiq," she purred, her eyes sparkling with a hint of amusement and satisfaction. Severus couldn't help but smile in response. He knew that this was merely the beginning of an exciting, unpredictable journey, one that he, for the first time, was ready to embrace wholeheartedly. And as he looked into Selene's golden eyes, he found himself wondering what other secrets and experiences lay hidden beneath her enigmatic facade. But for now, he was content to explore this newfound connection, one kiss at a time. She stood up gracefully from her chair, feeling the stretch as she straightened her back. Her movements were fluid and natural, like a cat waking up from a nap. As he looked up at her, half expecting her to leave, she surprised him by leaning closer, her warm breath sending shivers down his spine. "I like you, Shafiq," she whispered in his ear, her voice barely audible, yet carrying a weight that seemed to echo within him. The words settled in his heart like a small, glowing ember. "More than I probably should," she added, her voice tinged with a hint of mischief. Severus inhaled sharply at her confession, feeling his heart rate escalate. His mind raced, trying to process the unexpected turn of events. He could smell the faint scent of her perfume, a heady mix of essences that stirred something primal within him. In an instant, she pulled back from him, her eyes sparkling with amusement. She flashed him a smirk, her lips curved in a way that suggested she knew a secret he didn't. The smirk held a hint of danger, like a temptress leading him into a trap he couldn't resist. As she began to walk away, her hips swaying gently with each step, he sat there, frozen in his chair. His fingers curled slightly against the armrest, the only indication of the turmoil inside him. He watched her go, his eyes following her every movement until she was out of sight. Severus let out a deep breath he didn't know he was holding. He could feel the heat spreading throughout his body, like the slow burn of a smoldering fire. She was playing with him, and he knew it. But he found himself unable to resist, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. As he sat there, heart pounding in his chest, he knew he was dancing with danger. He could feel the flames licking at his fingertips, warning him of the impending consequences. But he couldn't help it. He wanted more. He was ready to take the risk, to follow her into the unknown, no matter the cost. Severus arrived at the dueling hall with time to spare, yet the echo of his footsteps was not the only sound reverberating off the stone walls. Ben, Jonas, Evie, Damien, and Selene were already engaged in their pre-session rituals, their movements a seamless dance of stretches and focused warm-ups, a silent testament to the grueling ordeal that lay ahead. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation when Professor Harlan strode into the chamber, his stern countenance and brisk gait a clear indicator that levity had no place in the training to come. His gaze swept over the assembled students, piercing and exacting. "Good. You're all punctual," he remarked, a hint of approval coloring his tone. "Let's dispense with any notions that this will resemble the Cirque's workshop." That was merely a prelude, a gentle introduction to the world you're about to enter. Jonas, ever the vocal one, released a low whistle. "Bloody hell," he muttered under his breath, earning a reproachful glance from Harland, who seemed impervious to such outbursts. As Harland ascended the dueling platform, his voice carried an authoritative weight. "The international dueling circuit is not a realm for the faint of heart. It demands more than honor or fair play. It is a crucible where skill, adaptability, and strategic acumen are paramount. Cling to rigid, formulaic techniques, and you may as well forfeit now." His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, briefly alighted on Severus before continuing their survey of the group. It was a look that did not invite questioning, only obedience. "Our first order of business will be nonverbal dueling. To compete at the highest levels, you must be proficient in casting without the crutch of incantations. Those who can't are at an immediate and severe disadvantage." The students, realizing the gravity of the challenge, silently paired off. Severus found himself facing Celine, her eyes gleaming with a mix of anticipation and friendly rivalry. "You again," she remarked, her voice laced with a playful challenge that seemed to mock the very air between them. "Getting tired of me yet?" Severus released a measured breath, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not yet," he replied, the words carrying a hint of defiance. Celine's grin was predatory, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Good. Try to keep up." The first duel was a whirlwind of motion and magic. Celine's movements were a blur, her wand work impeccable as she forced Severus to abandon his premeditated strategies in favor of raw instinct. He gritted his teeth, wrestling with the subtle art of nonverbal casting. His spells, though accurate, lacked the raw power and precision that seemed to come so effortlessly to her. She was relentless, exploiting his hesitation with a merciless precision that pinned him to the defensive, her spells weaving a web from which he struggled to break free. A sharp, silent, stunning spell sliced through the air, catching him off guard and sending him reeling backward. The impact resonated through his body, a stark reminder of the gulf that lay between them. Celine smirked, her eyes glinting with unconcealed satisfaction. "You're thinking too much again," she chided, her tone a blend of amusement and admonishment. Severus clenched his jaw, a muscle twitching in his cheek, a silent testament to his frustration. He needed to adjust his approach, to shed the constraints of his formal training and embrace a more instinctual style of dueling. As the session wore on, the tide began to turn, albeit slowly. Severus found his rhythm, his spells gaining in strength and his reflexes sharpening. He was not the victor when the dust settled, but neither was he the vanquished. Harland's assessment, delivered with a critical eye as he surveyed the scene, was both a commendation and a challenge. "Better than expected," he said, his gaze fixed on Severus. "But you need to unlearn everything Hogwarts taught you. Fast. If you're to stand a chance on the international stage, you must become unpredictable. Shed the skin of tradition and adapt to the chaos of true dueling." Severus nodded, absorbing the professor's words. The taste of defeat was bitter, but it was a necessary lesson. His eyes met Celine's, and in her gaze, he found a spark of respect that hadn't been there before. As the day's training neared its end, Harland, the seasoned combat instructor, looked at Severus, Ben, and Damien with a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Severus, Ben, and Damien," Harland called out, his voice echoing in the vast training arena. "You three will face each other in a three-way battle." At the same time, a knot formed in Severus's stomach, a cocktail of anticipation and dread. He could read the unspoken agreement in Ben and Damien's eyes. They planned to eliminate him first, to improve their chances of victory in the ensuing duel. Severus couldn't fault them for their strategy. In a fight where only one could emerge victorious, it was logical to weed out the weakest link first. Yet, the realization that he was the perceived underdog in this contest stung his pride. Ben, ever the confident one, cracked his knuckles with a grimace of faux sympathy. "Sorry, mate. A duel is a duel," he said, the edge in his voice belying his words. Damien, on the other hand, offered a predatory grin. "Try to keep up," he taunted, his tone laced with an arrogance honed by countless victories. Without further warning, the duel commenced. Ben, relying on his agility, darted around Severus, launching a flurry of attacks from different angles, forcing Severus to constantly shift his defense. Meanwhile, Damien hung back, exploiting the chaos by launching precision strikes from a distance, never allowing Severus a moment's respite. Severus fought back with all the skill and knowledge he possessed, yet the combined onslaught of his opponents was relentless. He managed to land a silent stupefy spell on Ben, momentarily taking him out of the fight, but his victory was short-lived. Before he could capitalize on the advantage, Damien's swift counterspell disarmed him, sending his wand clattering to the ground. Harland observed the chaotic battle unfolding before him with a critical gaze, his seasoned eyes scanning the flurry of movement. He nodded in silent approval, noting the impressive blend of innate ability and tactical acumen on display. "Not bad for your first 2-on-1, he commented, his voice carrying an undertone of respect. "You need better spatial awareness, though. It's crucial to anticipate your opponent's movements and position yourself accordingly." Severus, catching his breath after the intense skirmish, released a sharp exhale. It was not a sigh of exasperation, but rather a sound that signaled his unwavering resolve. His eyes, sharp and focused, met Harland's with an intensity that spoke volumes. There was no hint of frustration in his demeanor, only a deep sense of determination. He recognized the truth in Harland's words and was ready to hone his skills further, eager to transform this critique into a stepping stone for his growth. Later that evening, after a day that seemed to demand more from him than any other, Severus found solace in the solitude of a steaming shower. The hot water eased the tension in his muscles, and for a brief time, he could let the worries of the world wash down the drain. But reality awaited him, and with a towel wrapped around his waist, he made his way back to the sanctuary of his dorm room. As he opened the door, the side of his desk, usually a Spartan landscape, now bore two envelopes that seemed to stand out against the wood with an air of importance. They were like sentinels, guarding a message from another world, the world beyond Hogwarts that he had come from and, at times, longed to escape. One envelope bore the elegant, flowing script of Eileen Prince, his mother. The other, a more austere and commanding hand, belonged to Arcturus Prince, his uncle. Severus approached the desk with a sense of foreboding, his fingers hesitating before they reached for his mother's letter first. The paper was crisp, and as he broke the seal, the scent of home, a mixture of the parchment's mustiness and the faintest hint of his mother's perfume, wafted to his nostrils. Her handwriting was as precise and familiar as the sound of her voice, each loop and curve a testament to years of meticulous correspondence. "Severus, I trust this letter finds you hale and hearty. The house feels somewhat desolate in your absence. With the Yuletide season fast approaching, I find myself yearning for the warmth of a family Christmas. It has been far too long since we have spent such a holiday together. This year, I am hoping we might revive that tradition. I know your studies keep you occupied, and your uncle and I have respected your need for independence, but please consider returning home for the holidays. It would mean the world to me to have my son back for just a short while. Reflect upon it, Severus. We could be a family again, if only for a fleeting moment. With love, your mother." There was Alessandro De Luca, whose brazen charm and unabashed flirtations masked a deeply loyal heart. Jonas Carter and Ben Hale, ever competitive, had become comrades who spurred him on, recognizing him not as an adversary but as an equal in their pursuits. Evie Sterling and Keira Thompson, with their infectious laughter and playful teasing, had been instrumental in drawing him out of his shell and into the whirlwind of social gatherings. Severus spoke with particular reverence about Aurora Sinclair, a kindred spirit with whom he could engage in long, passionate discussions about the intricacies of magic, dissecting spells and magical theory for hours on end. And then there was Celine Everett, a subject on which he was less forthcoming, a hint of something unspoken lingering in his hesitation. Eileen, his mother, observed her son with a tender smile, noting the newfound light in his eyes as he shared his American adventures. It was a stark contrast to the shadowed figure he had been under the arches of Hogwarts, where solitude had been his constant companion for so many years. "You found something special there," Eileen remarked, her voice tinged with emotion, as she placed a comforting hand over his. Severus paused, absorbing her words. "I have," he confirmed, the simplicity of his response belying the depth of his conviction. Arcturus regarded Severus with an intensity that had become familiar over the years. "I take it that means you've made your decision?" he inquired, his voice carrying a weight of expectation. Severus, holding his uncle's gaze, responded with a resolve that surprised even himself. "I'm staying in Ilvermorny for my 7th year." The words hung in the air, solidifying his commitment. A subtle shift crossed Arcturus's face, a flicker of approval that was quickly masked by his usual stoic demeanor. Eileen, on the other hand, betrayed a hint of vulnerability. Her voice, when she spoke, was softer than usual. "I see," she murmured, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I suppose I knew this was coming." Severus felt a pang of guilt, his throat constricting with emotion. "You're not angry?" he asked, searching her face for a sign. Eileen offered a wistful smile, shaking her head. "I'll miss you, but I've never seen you this at peace." Her words were a balm to his conscience, affirming his choice. For a moment, Severus was speechless, awash with gratitude and a sense of belonging he had longed for. Then, gathering himself, he nodded, a silent pledge to the path he had chosen. Arcturus studied his nephew with newfound respect, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Well, I hope you know what you've done, Severus," he said, his tone laced with intrigue. Severus's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Arcturus took a leisurely sip of his drink, savoring the suspense. "You convinced me to reconsider Julius's education." Julius, who had been listlessly poking at his dessert, suddenly looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Wait, what?" Severus's brow furrowed as he lifted an eyebrow, a silent question hanging in the air. "You're considering sending him abroad?" he inquired, the hint of skepticism in his voice barely concealed. Arcturus, a man of few words but considerable wisdom, nodded in agreement. "Your experiences in Ilvermorny have proven one thing. The world is much bigger than Britain. I would be a fool not to consider that for Julius." His tone was firm, the weight of his decision evident in his measured words. Turning to his younger cousin, Severus posed a question that could shape the young boy's future. "What do you think, Julius?" His gaze was penetrating, as if trying to discern the youth's true feelings beneath the surface. Julius's face, a canvas of adolescent dreams, lit up with an intensity that betrayed his excitement. "I want to go to Ilvermorny," he declared, his voice echoing with unbridled enthusiasm that filled the room. Eileen, ever the voice of reason, allowed herself a soft chuckle, her eyes twinkling with a knowing glint. "At least consider other schools, Julius," she gently reminded him, her words a soft breeze meant to temper the gust of his ambition. Julius, though slightly taken aback by the reminder, huffed in a manner typical of his age, yet he nodded in acquiescence. "Fine," he conceded, the fire in his eyes dimming only slightly. "But definitely not Hogwarts." The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. His mind was made up. Severus, concealing a smirk that threatened to betray his amusement, inclined his head in a gesture of approval. "Smart choice," he remarked, his tone laced with an undercurrent of respect for the young boy's conviction. That night, Severus lingered by the grand window of his chamber, his gaze lost in the silvery expanse of the gardens that stretched out beneath the celestial glow of the moon. The manicured hedges and ancient trees cast long, eerie shadows that danced with the whims of the gentle night breeze, creating a tapestry of light and dark that mirrored the turmoil within his own heart. For years, the rolling hills and verdant landscapes of this magical country had cradled him in a sense of belonging and safety. The United States of America, with its burgeoning wizarding world, had been a place of refuge and growth for him. Ilvermorny's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, in particular, had opened its arms to him, offering knowledge, camaraderie, and a sense of purpose that had once seemed unattainable. But as he stood there, the chilling realization crept over him that the familiar had become foreign. The life he had painstakingly built felt increasingly like a fading echo, a chapter in a book that was slowly closing. The manor, once a symbol of his integration into this new world, now stood as a stark reminder of the life he had left behind across the Atlantic. In Britain, the thought of his birthplace invoked a cocktail of emotions. It was a land steeped in personal history, both proud and painful. The memories of his upbringing, the rigid structures of Hogwarts, and the looming shadow of a tumultuous past now mingled with the promise of what might have been. The recent months had seen him evolve in ways he could never have anticipated, and with that evolution came uncertainty. Severus was at a crossroads, caught between two worlds. The future that once seemed so clear, so full of potential in the hallowed halls of Ilvermorny, was now shrouded in doubt. The path back to Britain, with all its complexities and unresolved matters, was a road fraught with ambiguity. As the moon continued its silent vigil over the gardens of Prince Manor, Severus was left to ponder the weight of his choices and the true meaning of home. The Malfoy Christmas Ball was an event steeped in the highest echelons of Wizarding Society's calendar. It was an occasion that transcended mere social gatherings, carrying with it the weight of generations. To decline an invitation to the Malfoys' festive gala was unthinkable, a slight that could reverberate through the corridors of power for years to come. It was tradition, a rite of passage for the noble families of Britain's magical world. Allegiance to the light, the dark, or the precarious balance in between mattered little on this night. Clad in finery, the elite of Wizarding Britain would converge upon the grand estate of Malfoy Manor, drawn by the unspoken rule that attendance was not just expected but required. The ball served as a potent reminder of the delicate tapestry of alliances and rivalries that defined their society. The manor, resplendent with holiday decorations that hinted at opulence and a whisper of malice, was the stage for this annual spectacle. Lord and Lady Malfoy, Abraxas and Eleanor, were the evening's esteemed hosts. Abraxas, a man whose political acumen was as renowned as his family's pureblood lineage, had meticulously shaped the dark faction into a formidable force. His influence permeated every corner of the magical world, and his machinations were as intricate and far-reaching as the grandeur of the ball itself. Unlike his father, Lucius Malfoy exuded a certain beguiling charm that cleverly veiled his unyielding ambition. Yet, it was Abraxas who stood as the architect of the dark faction's current might. His vision extended beyond the ball's festivities, transforming the evening into a strategic game of chess, where each move was calculated with the precision of a master. This was not merely a party, it was a meticulously veiled battleground. Each attendee, an unwitting combatant, was drawn into the fray, whether by choice or by the irresistible pull of societal expectation. The evening unfurled like a silent war, with alliances forming and fracturing over the delicate clinking of crystal champagne flutes. In the hallowed halls of the grand estate, the clandestine murmurs of the powerful echoed, as they negotiated the fates of many over bubbling effervescence. It was a night where futures hung by a thread, where a single, carefully chosen dialogue could weave a tapestry of prosperity or unravel the fabric of one's destiny. In the shadows of this ostentatious display of unity, a more sinister gathering took place. The dark faction, cloaked in elegance yet malevolent in intent, sought to ensnare more of Britain's elite into their intricate web. With promises of influence and the intoxicating allure of forbidden power, they worked tirelessly to persuade the influential that the ascending Dark Lord was not just a contender for the throne of power, but the only sovereign worth serving. Severus had no intention of succumbing to the dark faction's seductive lure. His resolve was as unyielding as the stone walls that surrounded them. Yet, he was equally aware of the peril that came with appearing weak or reluctant in such company. To maintain his standing and protect his secrets, he must don the mask of a willing participant in their games of power. Thus, with a heart steeled by unspoken intentions and a countenance betrayed by neither fear nor disdain, Severus accepted the inevitable. He would attend the gathering, not as a pawn in their grand scheme, but as a sentinel, vigilant against the undercurrents of treachery. The weight of his decision settled upon him like the chill of the winter air, a reminder that the game of power was not to be taken lightly. At Prince Manor, the air buzzed with anticipation as the evening's affair drew near. Arcturus, ever the meticulous lord, had seen to it that every detail was perfect. For Severus, this meant access to the most skilled tailors and the most luxurious fabrics. The objective was not to help him fade into the background, but rather to ensure that he would be a figure of unmissable distinction. Severus, with his discerning eye, selected a robe of deepest black silk, adorned with silver thread that traced intricate patterns along its edges. The embroidery caught the flickering candlelight, creating an effect that was both subtle and commanding. It was a silent proclamation of his presence, a statement that needed no words. Eileen, with her motherly intuition, fussed over the final touches. She adjusted his cufflinks, her hands steady despite the quiet sigh that escaped her. "You wear power well, Severus," she remarked, her voice tinged with a complex mix of pride and concern. He met her gaze, catching the subtle crease that marred her otherwise serene features. "You disapprove?" he inquired, his tone hinting at the understanding that lay beneath his stoic exterior. "I worry," Eileen confessed, her fingers gently smoothing the fabric across his shoulders. "The Malfoys are not like other families, Severus. They are embroiled in schemes and ambitions. Inviting you is no mere gesture of hospitality. They intend to sound the depths of your allegiances." Severus's response was a small, confident smirk, the kind that revealed his awareness of the game being played. "Then let them test me," he declared, his voice resonating with a quiet assurance. From his armchair by the crackling fireplace, Arcturus's laughter rose above the sound of the flames. "That's the spirit, boy," he commended, his approval clear in the warmth of his words. The stage was set, and as the evening approached, so did the unspoken challenges and the silent battles that would test the mettle of Severus Snape. Malfoy Manor stood as a testament to the old magical aristocracy, its silhouette cutting a stark contrast against the twilight sky. The grandeur of the estate was accentuated by the soft, ethereal glow of lanterns that floated aimlessly above, casting an otherworldly radiance over the meticulously kept grounds. As Severus approached the manor, he could not help but feel the palpable weight of the evening ahead. Upon crossing the threshold, Severus was enveloped by the manor's opulent interior, the atmosphere charged with an intoxicating blend of elegance and power. The murmur of conversation ebbed as heads turned, a sea of faces reflecting a spectrum of reactions. Admiration shone in the eyes of some, their gazes lingering on the enigmatic potions master whose reputation preceded him. Curiosity flickered in others, eager to discern the motives behind his rare appearances in such grand social gatherings. Lucius Malfoy, however, regarded Severus with a shrewd, appraising look, his mind undoubtedly cataloging potential alliances and rivalries. The gleam of silver hair marked Lucius's approach as he navigated the crowd with an air of unquestioned authority. Lifting a crystal glass in a silent toast, Lucius offered Severus a greeting wrapped in the velvet of his well-practiced charm. "Severus," Lucius intoned, the corners of his mouth curling into a knowing smile. "I see you've decided to grace us with your presence for the holiday festivities." Severus met Lucius's greeting with a characteristic raise of his eyebrow, the subtle gesture conveying both acknowledgement and a hint of disdain. "And here I thought civilization entailed more than a congregation of well-dressed vipers in a gilded ballroom," Severus retorted, his voice a low drawl laced with dry humor. Lucius's laughter echoed lightly, the sound as smooth as the finest fire whiskey. "You do have a way with words, Shafik." Regulus Black sauntered into the room with an air of aristocratic nonchalance, positioning himself beside Lucius Malfoy as if it were the most natural place for him to be. The quintessential image of the Black family's stoic air. His voice, when he spoke, carried a hint of dry wit. "You make quite the entrance," Regulus observed, his gaze piercing and discerning. "But then again, you've been making waves even across the Atlantic. Your reputation precedes you." Severus allowed himself a faint, self-satisfied smirk. "I do try to stay productive," he replied, his tone suggesting that his achievements were merely a matter of course. Severus was aware of their arrival before they uttered a word. The subtle alteration in the atmosphere, the palpable tension that accompanied their entrance, the hostility they attempted to mask with the veneer of nobility was apparent to him. A voice, laced with a contempt that was barely contained, sliced through the surrounding conversations. "I see you're still slithering around, Shafik," the voice jeered. Severus turned, his countenance one of practiced indifference, to meet the glare of James Potter, whose hazel eyes were narrowed in obvious dislike. Beside Potter stood Sirius Black, equally disdainful, with his arms folded and a rigid posture. Their demeanor lacked the usual smugness they exhibited at Hogwarts. Here, they seemed constrained, their confidence replaced by a noticeable tenseness. A reminder that this was not the school corridors where they could freely hex and ridicule him without repercussions. This was a battleground where Severus had the advantage. With a single arched eyebrow, Severus surveyed them with an air of casual disregard. "Potter. Black. I didn't expect to see you here," he remarked, his tone flat. James's hand clenched around his glass, betraying his attempt at nonchalance. Funny, I was about to say the same about you. Severus responded with a noncommittal hum, tilting his head slightly. Yes, well, I was invited, he said, his voice carrying a hint of smugness as he highlighted the distinction between them. Sirius's jaw tightened, but it was James who stepped forward, his voice a hushed growl. You don't belong here. Severus released a measured breath, as though humoring the outburst of a particularly dim-witted child. Yes. And you, naturally, are the paragon of belonging, aren't you, Potter? James's nostrils flared in response to the taunt. You can masquerade as nobility all you like, Snape, but we're all well aware of your true nature. Severus's lips curled into a smirk, his tone laced with velvet sarcasm. Do enlighten me, Potter. What exactly do you believe I am? James's hands clenched into fists, his composure slipping. Lucius Malfoy, positioned beside Severus, allowed a low, derisive chuckle to escape. Such rancor at a celebratory event. Have they not instilled basic etiquette in the Potter household, James? Regulus Black, who had been observing from the periphery with a detached air, finally interjected, his speech languid yet articulate. They seem to be under the impression that bravado can secure their place. How utterly pedestrian. Sirius glared at his brother, his gray eyes stormy. Mind your own business, Regulus. Regulus's smirk was almost imperceptible, but this spectacle is simply too diverting to ignore. Severus let the tension simmer, observing James and Sirius as they grappled with their pride, well aware that any misstep would not only tarnish their own reputations, but also that of their families. He leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping to a volume intended only for their ears. It appears you've mistaken me for someone who retains any interest in your trivial schoolyard disputes. My time is far too valuable to be wasted on pampering your delicate self-images. Now, if you'll allow me to proceed, I believe the conversation at hand is meant for more mature minds. James's body went rigid, his fingers quivering with the unspoken desire to grasp his wand. Sirius appeared on the verge of losing his composure. Lucius, on the other hand, released a hearty laugh, clearly amused. Well played, Shafik, he praised with a murmur. Severus offered a slight, sardonic bow. Civility is my middle name. With that, he pivoted, abandoning them to simmer in their vexation. Let them seethe. Let them harbor their bitterness. For when all is said and done, they remained merely juveniles, engaged in a contest they were ill-equipped to conquer. Severus Snape sensed her before he saw her, a subtle disturbance in the fabric of magic that surrounded him. The air shifted, carrying with it the faintest hint of an expensive fragrance, and then she materialized from the crowd, Narcissa Black. At this point in time, she was not yet entwined with the Malfoy destiny, not yet the wife of Lucius. She was a vision in ice blue silk, her blonde hair arranged in a complex configuration of plaits and flowing ringlets that spoke of wealth and breeding. Every inch of her exuded elegance and a regal aloofness that was both intimidating and alluring. And yet, despite her untouchable aura, Narcissa's gaze was fixed on him. Her eyes, as cold and captivating as a winter sky, were locked onto his with an intensity that was both startling and intriguing. You don't belong here, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the gathered aristocracy. Her words were a soft blade, meant to cut without leaving a visible wound. Severus's lips twitched in the semblance of a smile, his dark eyes reflecting a challenge rather than submission. And yet, here I am, he replied, his voice steady and tinged with a hint of defiance. Narcissa's head inclined ever so slightly, a ghost of amusement playing across her features. For how long, I wonder? Her question hung in the air, a silken thread weaving between them. Taking his time, Severus lifted the glass to his lips, savoring the burn of the liquor as it slid down his throat. That depends, he said, lowering the glass to reveal a smirk that seemed both out of place and entirely fitting. On. Narcissa pressed, her curiosity piqued. He let the silence stretch for a moment longer before answering. How entertaining this night proves to be. The words were a veiled promise, a suggestion that perhaps the evening held more intrigue than either of them had initially anticipated. A soft, knowing laugh escaped Narcissa's lips, a sound that managed to be both mocking and inviting. It was clear that she found his response amusing, yet there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "You play the game with more skill than I expected, Severus Snape," she conceded, her voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. Severus's smirk broadened into a rare, genuine smile, the expression transforming his usually austere features. "I've always preferred games that require a certain depth of strategy," he replied, his tone suggesting that he was not one to be underestimated. The two stood in silent understanding, each recognizing the other as a formidable player in the complex dance of power and politics that permeated their world. Around them, the ball continued, a whirlwind of color and sound that seemed almost trivial in comparison to the subtle exchange occurring between them. "Lucius watches me as if I am already his possession," she murmured, her voice a mere thread carried on the still air. "Yet, I am not. Not entirely." Inching closer, she reduced the space between them to a mere whisper, ensuring her following words were for his ears alone. "But pray, Severus, have you ever let your mind wander to the forbidden? To the thrill of claiming something not yet yours?" Her breath, warm and teasing, danced across his skin like a specter, leaving behind a trail of goosebumps. The provocation lacing her tone was unmistakable, a siren's call to the darker parts of his nature. And in that fleeting, unguarded moment, Severus found himself teetering on the edge of temptation, contemplating the very transgression she so daringly proposed. But with a will born of long practice and self-restraint, he raised his glass like a shield between them, disrupting the intoxicating nearness. "Not yet," he echoed, his voice betraying none of the turmoil within. Narcissa's smile, as sharp as a blade's edge, did not quite reach her eyes. "A shame," she purred, the word hanging in the air like a silent admonition. And with the grace of a specter, she vanished, leaving behind only the faintest hint of her perfume and the echo of a challenge unmet. The ball progressed in full swing, a dazzling display of the British magical elite. Severus Snape, having grown weary of the constant political maneuvering, had retreated to a shadowed corner of the ballroom. He sought a respite from the incessant whispers and the veiled contempt that seemed to permeate the air. But as he sipped his drink, a subtle change in the atmosphere arrested his attention. It was more than a simple quieting of the crowd. An eerie stillness descended upon the room, so profound that it felt as though the very magic within the space had drawn back, holding its breath in anticipation. Then, with a suddenness that made Severus's pulse quicken, the shift occurred. The grand entrance to the ballroom framed a figure that commanded instant attention. Abraxas Malfoy, a man of considerable influence and power, was eclipsed the moment he was no longer the solitary focus of the assembly's gaze. The true center of attention had arrived. Severus's heart lodged in his throat as recognition dawned. It couldn't be. The man who walked beside Malfoy, with an air of such palpable menace and charisma, should have been a ghost, a spectral figure from the darkest corners of Severus's memory. Yet, there he was, in the flesh. Tom Riddle, Lord Voldemort. Unmasked, unhidden by the cloak of shadows that had once shrouded him, Voldemort strode into the ballroom with the bearing of a conquering monarch returning to his realm. He moved with a sinister grace that seemed to sever the room's oxygen supply, leaving those present gasping for breath. The lords of the dark factions, previously engaged in their own intrigues, shifted like a flock of birds changing direction at the predator's approach. They converged around Voldemort, their expressions a mix of reverence, fear, and unspoken allegiance. It was clear that they acknowledged his dominion over them. This was no secretive meeting of covert supporters. This was a bold proclamation, a statement of power and intention played out on the grandest stage of the wizarding world. The sight of it made Severus moment. He understood. Everything was about to change. The transformation in the ballroom's ambience was palpable, as if an unseen hand had adjusted the very molecules in the air, infusing them with a taut anticipation. This was no mere trick of the light or sleight of hand. It was the undeniable aura of raw power that permeated the vast, opulently adorned space. Severus Snape, whose sharp eyes had witnessed the machinations of the influential, recognized this change. It was an intangible weight that entered with the two men, a silent proclamation of dominion. When Lord Thomas Gaunt made his entrance alongside Lord Abraxas Malfoy, The chatter that had previously filled the room grew sparse, giving way to a thickening silence that hung heavy with respect and a frisson of fear. Conversations faltered, then resumed in muted tones, as if the guests were collectively aware of speaking in the presence of royalty, or something more sinister. There was an inherent understanding that the man who had just stepped into their midst was not to be trifled with. Severus schooled his features into an impassive mask, a skill honed through years of practice, but inwardly, his thoughts were a whirlwind of calculations and conjectures. Thomas Gaunt, heir to the illustrious House of Gaunt, was a figure surrounded by whispers and veiled in shadows. To the public eye, he was the epitome of nobility, a scion of one of the most ancient and respected families in magical society. Yet to those who operated in the clandestine corridors of power, namely, the Dark Faction, he was much more. He was a comet blazing across the night sky, a beacon for those who thirsted for dominance and influence. His association with the influential and notorious Lord Malfoy had further cemented his position, though the true nature of their relationship remained shrouded in mystery. To the public eye, he was an enigma, a charismatic nobleman whose presence commanded attention. Yet, beneath the veneer of aristocratic charm, lay a chilling reality known only to a select few. Thomas Gaunt was more than the sum of his public personas. He was Voldemort, the one the world would come to fear above all others. The lords who acknowledged him with curt nods at social gatherings, the ladies whose curious glances he caught, they were all oblivious to the malevolent force that resided within him. Only the inner circle of the Dark Faction, those deeply embedded in its shadowy machinations, understood the gravity of his true identity. As he moved through the opulent halls of power, the leaders of the Dark Faction seemed drawn to him as if by some unspoken, sinister magnetism. Their conversations were veiled, their voices lowered to conspiratorial whispers, but their eyes betrayed an eager anticipation. It was clear that Thomas Gaunt's, Voldemort's, sway over them was not merely acknowledged, it was revered. With each hushed exchange, his dominion expanded, and so did the peril he represented to the world at large. Severus had harbored expectations of encountering something macabre, a visage that would match the whispers that slithered through the halls of Hogwarts, the rumors that circulated in the darkest corners of the wizarding world, and the terrifying descriptions found in the most forbidden of books. These sources had collectively crafted an image of Voldemort as a creature of nightmares, a being whose very appearance was a testament to his detachment from humanity. Pallid skin, eyes glowing an unnatural crimson. Yet, when Severus's eyes fell upon the figure before him, he found himself face to face with Lord Thomas Gaunt, a man whose handsomeness was undeniable. Gaunt's appeal was not the ethereal beauty of a Lucius Malfoy, whose features seemed chiseled from marble, nor was it the captivating allure of a Regulus Black, whose youthful visage was as sharp as it was magnetic. No, Gaunt stood apart. He was an embodiment of understated power, his stature tall and imposing, his dark robes a testament to his authority, devoid of ostentation, yet resonating with an aura of strength. His high cheekbones and noble bearing were complemented by eyes that seemed to harbor unfathomable depths of intelligence. The air around him was charged with a presence that did not scream for recognition, but rather ensnared the attention of all who crossed his path, rendering them unable to tear their gaze away. Every movement was deliberate, each gesture executed with calculated grace, his words selected with the utmost care, as if he were weaving a spell with his very cadence. Severus felt a knot of unease form within his gut. The man who stood before him was a stark contrast to the Voldemort he had read about in the Harry Potter series in his last life. The discrepancy left Severus with a sense of disquiet. Had the tales of Voldemort's monstrous appearance been embellished? Or had the Dark Lord undergone a profound transformation before the canonical history had even begun to unfold? Or was this an elaborate ruse, a masterful illusion designed to deceive even those who believed they knew the true face of evil? Severus was torn, unable to decide which situation was more intolerable. Severus stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Gaunt, studying the man's every move with a keen eye. There was no need for Gaunt to assert his dominance. It was inherent, a palpable aura that filled the room and claimed it as his own. The lords of the Dark Faction leaned in, as if drawn by an unseen force, subtly acknowledging his superiority with every tilt of their heads. The Grey faction members, maintaining a careful balance, kept a respectful distance, their faces schooled into masks of neutrality. Even the light-aligned whispers among themselves, their voices carrying an unmistakable note of uncertainty, hinted at the enigma that was Gaunt. The atmosphere shifted subtly when Lord Nott, known for his strict neutrality, stepped forward to greet Gaunt. His salutation was formal, his bow slight, yet laden with the weight of unspoken tension. "Lord Gaunt," Nott said, the words precise and measured. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance." Gaunt's response was a calculated smile, one that did not reach his eyes but spoke volumes of his control over the situation. "Lord Nott," he replied, his voice as smooth as silk, yet underlying his cordiality was a distinct chill. His words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken challenge. Severus, observing from the sidelines, understood the silent power play unfolding before him. Gaunt was not merely conversing. He was probing, assessing Nott's mettle without resorting to legitimacy or overt magical displays. It was a test of wills, a subtle duel fought with mere presence in the force of personality. In that moment, it became clear to Severus that Gaunt's influence extended far beyond titles and alliances. It was rooted in an intrinsic ability to command attention and respect, even from those who considered themselves as equals. And Nott knew it, the truth hanging in the air like a storm cloud about to burst. The older lord, with a face etched by time and secrets, inclined his head slightly, a gesture that acknowledged Severus's presence and conceded just enough respect to maintain the fragile peace that existed between them. This was a dance of subtlety and subtext, a political ballet where every movement was laden with meaning. Gaunt, the ever-observant, smiled again, a thin curl of the lips that did not reach his eyes. It was a dismissive expression, one that swept the moment's tension aside as if it were nothing more than a bothersome cobweb. He moved on, gliding through the room with the grace of a predator that had already claimed its territory, his demeanor suggesting that the minor disturbance had never happened. Severus watched, his breath escaping in a slow, measured exhale. This was far more dangerous than what the books had suggested, more treacherous than the theoretical scenarios he had studied so diligently. The Dark Lord didn't need to force people into submission with brute strength or the terrors of his magic. Instead, he created an environment where they submitted willingly, drawn into his web by the allure of power, the promise of protection, or the fear of retribution. Each individual, bound by their own desires and fears, became a willing participant in their own subjugation. Severus understood this and felt the weight of it in his bones. The game they were all playing was one of survival, and the stakes were higher than ever. Severus should have kept his head down, allowed himself to dissolve into the shadows, unnoticed and unbothered. Yet, Lucius had harbored other intentions. Severus's reaction was barely perceptible when Lucius, positioned beside the imperious Gaunt, made a discreet motion in his direction as he spoke. And this, Lucius's voice slid through the room like silk, is the scion of House Shafik, Severus Shafik. The name, imbued with the weight of lineage and expectation, wended its way through the gathered assembly until it reached the ears of Voldemort. And for the first time, the world seemed to still. Those piercing dark eyes, which had previously skimmed over the crowd, now settled on Severus with an almost tangible force. And they lingered. Severus felt the scrutiny. It was not the invasive touch of legitimacy, nor was it a manifestation of overt magic. It was, however, equally as powerful. A silent assessment, a quiet yet profound evaluation, a verdict hanging in the balance, waiting to crystallize. Severus remained stoic, his expression schooled into impassivity. He did not flinch, nor did he bow his head in deference. Instead, with a carefully calibrated motion, he inclined his head ever so slightly. It was a gesture that artfully balanced the line between respect and challenge, not submission, nor defiance. Merely an acknowledgement of the recognition he had been afforded. Gaunt, ever the keen observer, allowed a ghost of a smile to play upon his lips, there and gone in an instant. Then, as if nothing of consequence had transpired, he turned his attention away. But Severus was not deceived. The man had noticed him. In that moment, beneath the gaze of Voldemort, Severus had irrevocably crossed a threshold. He had stepped into the game, a player now in a contest of far-reaching implications and uncertain outcomes. And there would be no turning back. He needed to escape, and not just from the opulence of the ballroom. Severus had to flee Britain itself. Months of meticulous planning and personal sacrifice had led him to this point, where he stood on the precipice of an existence he had painstakingly crafted for himself. Yet here he was, teetering on the brink of a chasm far more perilous than any he had foreseen. The source of this imminent danger was none other than Lord Thomas Gaunt, known in darker circles as Voldemort. This man was not merely a sorcerer with a thirst for power. He was a commander, a strategist, an elemental force that could not be overlooked or underestimated. And as Severus watched with a sinking heart, he saw Britain succumbing to Voldemort's influence, oblivious to the true nature of the threat that loomed over them. Severus knew he could not risk being caught in the crossfire when the inevitable came to pass. The established narratives, the expected allegiances can and be damned. He would not be swayed by the pressures to join the ranks of the Death Eaters. But neither would he be drawn into the fray on the side of the light. No, Severus was determined to forge a path that was entirely his own, guided by his own principles and ambitions. The events of this fateful night had crystallized a harsh truth in his mind. The war was not a distant storm on the horizon. It had already arrived, and its tempests were already beginning to rage. Severus was resolute in his decision to not be a mere piece in someone else's game. He would navigate these treacherous waters with caution and cunning, ensuring that his destiny would be of his own making. The war for the future of the wizarding world had begun, and Severus Shafik would face it on his own terms. As Severus Snape made his way to the back door, his mind raced with the gravity of what he had just overheard. The hushed voices behind him seemed to grow louder, even as they whispered, "By next year, he'll have complete control over half the Wisengamot." The words pierced the air like a dagger, settling heavily in Severus's heart. His hand tightened reflexively around the glass he held, the knuckles turning white under the strain. The implications of such a shift in power were clear and dire. Severus had always known that the world of magic was fraught with danger, but this was a tide turning in a direction that spelled disaster. He could feel the grip of darkness tightening around the magical community, and he knew he could not stand idly by. He needed to leave Britain, and swiftly at that. The decision was as sudden as it was necessary. Severus had long ago learned to trust his instincts, and they were screaming at him now, urging him to flee the brewing storm. The game, as they so often referred to the political machinations of the wizarding world, was already afoot, and it was a game in which Severus could no longer afford to play. Every fiber of his being told him that staying was not merely risky, it was suicidal. There was too much at stake, and the stakes were rising with each passing moment. Severus knew he had to act, to seek refuge beyond the reach of those who sought to dominate and control. With a final, fleeting glance over his shoulder, Severus stepped out into the night, the cool air a stark contrast to the heated turmoil within him. His resolve was unwavering. He would leave Britain, and he would do it soon. For the game was indeed in motion, and Severus Snape was no one's pawn. Severus stood in the midst of the bustling ballroom, the echoes of laughter and whispers of conspiracy failing to penetrate the fog of his contemplation. The grandeur of the chandeliers, once dazzling, now seemed muted against the backdrop of his tumultuous thoughts. The revelry around him was a stark contrast to the gravity of the night's events, which pressed upon him like a leaden shroud. As he grappled with the implications of what he had just witnessed, a figure insinuated itself into his periphery. Lucius Malfoy, silver-haired and enigmatic, his presence as insidious as a shadow. In his hand, a glass of wine caught the dimmed light, and his features were an impenetrable mask. "You're rather quiet, Shafik," Lucius remarked, his voice a low drawl that cut through Severus's introspection. Severus remained silent, his mind a whirlwind of analysis and recalibration. There was too much to unpack, too much at stake. Lucius's smirk was a thin blade in the dim light. Processing are we?" Finally, Severus met the older Malfoy's gaze, his eyes honed to a lethal edge. "And what exactly am I supposed to be processing, Lucius?" The smirk on Lucius's face broadened, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling prescience. "You're intelligent enough to figure that out on your own. Severus released a measured breath through his nose, recognizing the familiar goad in Lucius's tone. "Don't toy with me, Malfoy." A chuckle escaped Lucius as he surveyed the room, his glass tilting as if toasting unseen specters. "Severus, you're a fascinating case. You spent your years at Hogwarts overshadowed by those less deserving. Yet now, in the world beyond those ancient walls, your name is on the lips of every influential family. And not merely as an unparalleled potioneer, but as a formidable presence in the grand game we all play." Severus's jaw tightened perceptibly, a subtle betrayal of his inner turmoil. "I never asked to be in this game," he uttered, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the tension in the air. Lucius responded with a soft, mirthless laugh, his head shaking in a gesture that seemed to convey both amusement and a patronizing sort of pity. "My dear Severus," he began, his voice smooth and almost fatherly, "you were born into it. You are the last scion of a most ancient and noble house, a lineage with roots entwined deeply with both the light and the dark. You, of all people, are someone who cannot afford the luxury of neutrality." Severus felt his fingers curling into fists at his sides, the truth of Lucius's words gnawing at him. He had always been aware of his heritage, his destiny, a burden he had carried since the moment of his birth. But the events of this night had painted that reality in stark, unyielding colors. Neutrality was not just a challenge, it was an impossibility. Lucius's voice softened further, taking on an almost kind timbre that was entirely out of character. "You can keep fleeing to America, Severus, but Britain isn't finished with you. You have a place here, a lineage to honor, and power that is yours by right. You are Shafik, and your family's legacy is not something you can outrun." Severus turned his gaze slightly, his dark eyes fixing on the man beside him. Lucius Malfoy, his rival, his sometimes ally, was regarding him with an intensity that was unnerving. Gone was the usual taunting smirk, the arrogant tilt of his head. Instead, Lucius's gaze was steady, almost solemn, not mocking, not laced with superiority, just expectant, as though he was a spectator awaiting the final move in a grandmaster's chess game. The silence that stretched between them was heavy with anticipation, a silent acknowledgement of the roles they were both destined to play in the tumultuous game of power and politics that was their world. Severus Snape felt a cold knot of frustration tighten within his chest as he stood in the dimly lit room, the shadows casting an appropriate gloom over his thoughts. It seemed as though everyone had their hands outstretched, palms upward, each eager to claim a piece of him for their own purposes. The light, with its incessant, self-righteous demands. The dark, with its seductive promises of power and revenge. And then there were those like Malfoy, who played a more nuanced game, one that was no less manipulative. But Severus had never been one to conform to the role of a pawn in another's grand strategy. He had his own plans, his own objectives, and they did not align with simply being an instrument for another's will. With a practiced ease born of years of concealing his true feelings, Severus exhaled slowly, his face a mask of impassivity that could rival the stoicism of the stone gargoyles perched high upon the castle's towers. "I appreciate the advice, Malfoy," Severus said, his voice as smooth and unyielding as marble, betraying none of the turmoil that simmered beneath the surface. "But I decide my own fate." Lucius Malfoy's smirk, a permanent fixture upon his arrogant face, didn't falter, but there was a fleeting shadow that passed through his pale gray eyes. Was it respect? Perhaps a hint of approval for the other man's defiance. "Of course, Severus," Malfoy replied, his voice a low drawl as he swirled the ruby liquid in his glass before taking a leisurely sip. "Do keep that in mind when the board starts closing in on you." The veiled threat hung in the air, as tangible as the scent of the burning fireplace. Severus felt the muscles in his jaw clench, but he would not give Malfoy the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he turned on his heel, the fabric of his robes whispering against the stone floor, a soft counterpoint to the harshness of his emotions. He needed to leave, to extricate himself from the stifling atmosphere of intrigue and veiled hostility. Severus had nearly managed to extricate himself from the stifling atmosphere of the gathering. The conversation with Lucius, which had been a dance of veiled meanings and political undertones, had finally concluded, allowing Severus to set his sights on the sanctuary of the exit. His intention was clear: to vanish into the night before another soul could detain him with inane chatter or probing questions. But as fate would have it, luck was not on his side this evening. Naughty, Shafiq heard a voice that seemed to caress the very air around him. Severus froze, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling in recognition of that all-too-familiar drawl. He had been hoping to avoid this particular encounter. With a resignation that felt like a lead weight in his chest, he pivoted on his heel to face the owner of the voice. There, in the soft glow of the balcony's lanterns, stood Narcissa Black, or rather, Narcissa Malfoy, as she was soon to be known. She was the epitome of elegance and grace, her ethereal beauty as crisp and untouchable as a winter's frost. Her pale blonde hair was meticulously coiffed, each strand woven into place with an artisan's precision. Her piercing blue eyes, sharp and perceptive, regarded him with an expression that was both playful and predatory. Severus allowed himself a moment of silent exasperation before he composed his features into a mask of indifference. "Narcissa," he acknowledged with a curt nod, his voice deliberately devoid of emotion. "Shouldn't you be at Lucius's side, basking in the glow of your impending nuptials?" A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips, as if she could see right through his thinly veiled attempt at disinterest. "Lucius is otherwise engaged, lost in the labyrinth of political niceties. I, on the other hand, have seized the chance to escape into the quiet," she replied, taking a step closer, her eyes roaming over him with an assessing gaze. "Imagine my delight when I saw you attempting to slip away." Severus didn't respond immediately, taken aback by the unexpected nature of the encounter. It wasn't the attention per se that surprised him. He had grown somewhat accustomed to the whispers that now followed his name, the curious glances of certain witches who had only recently begun to notice the once obscure boy from a lineage long forgotten by the wizarding world's high society. However, the sight of Narcissa Black approaching him was something else entirely. This was a development that deviated significantly from the norm. At Hogwarts, their interactions had been virtually non-existent. She had been aware of him, as one is aware of all within their social stratum, but that awareness had never translated into genuine interest or engagement. Their acquaintance had been superficial at best, limited to the occasional encounter at Horace Slughorn's exclusive gatherings or through his more esteemed housemate, Lucius Malfoy. In those settings, Severus had been nothing more than a peripheral figure, a shadow lingering on the outskirts of Narcissa's gilded world. To her, he had been inconsequential, a mere blip on the radar of her privileged existence. Yet, despite the stark differences in their social standings and the indifference she had always shown him, Severus couldn't deny the quiet fascination she held for him. Narcissa had always been beautiful in his eyes, an ethereal presence that he admired from afar, though he had never allowed himself to entertain the notion that she might see him as anything more than the nobody he was presumed to be. Until this very moment. And so, as Narcissa Black stood before him, seeking his attention for reasons unknown, Severus found himself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. There was skepticism, a wariness born from years of being overlooked, but beneath that, a flicker of something warmer, a hope that perhaps, in some inexplicable way, the tides of fate were turning in his favor. At least. Until this moment, Severus had managed to convince himself that his fascination with Narcissa Malfoy was a relic of a past life. And yet, despite all logic and the stark reality of his current circumstances, he had always found her beautiful. It was an allure that transcended time and space, rooted not in the present, but in the echoes of another era. In the last life, when he had been George, a mere reader of tales, not a participant in their unfolding, he had encountered her as a fleeting figure in someone else's narrative. Even then, she had captivated him, the most stunning of the Black sisters in his eyes. She was like a marble statue, cold and untouchable, a woman who meticulously guarded her inner world, never allowing more than a controlled glimpse to those who dared to peer in. And now, here she was, materialized before him in the flesh, her presence as commanding as ever. She regarded him with the predatory intensity of a cat eyeing its next meal, her gaze fixed on him with a focus that was both unsettling and thrilling. "You're staring, Severus," she murmured, the faintest trace of amusement coloring her voice. He blinked, the spell momentarily broken. Then, collecting himself, he regained his composure. "You approached me, Narcissa. Surely you had a reason," he retorted coolly, his voice betraying none of the turmoil she stirred within him. A slow, deliberate smile curled her lips, a silent acknowledgement of his observation. "I did," she confessed, her voice a soft melody that seemed to resonate in the quiet space between them. She took another step toward him, her movement intentional and precise. It was too close, too deliberate, a clear invasion of the carefully constructed boundaries he had erected around himself. Severus stood his ground, betraying no outward sign of discomfort. But beneath the surface, his pulse quickened, a treacherous giveaway of the effect she had on him. "You've changed," she remarked, her voice barely above a whisper as she trailed a single, perfectly manicured finger down the edge of his dark sleeve. The subtle gesture was both an acknowledgement and an invitation. "I always knew you were clever, but clever isn't the same as dangerous." Severus regarded her with a single arched brow, his expression unreadable. "And do you find that appealing?" he inquired, his tone laced with an undercurrent of challenge. A soft hum escaped her lips, a sound that seemed to vibrate with the thrill of their conversation. "I find it intriguing," she admitted, her gaze locked onto his. Something unspoken and potent hung in the air between them, a tangible presence that seemed to thicken with each passing second. It was temptation, pure and simple, a test of wills that neither could afford to lose. A moment stretched between them, taut with anticipation. One that Severus could either end with a word or indulge with a gesture. It was a precipice, and they both stood perilously close to the edge. But before Severus could decide on his next move, Narcissus stepped back, withdrawing from the invisible line that had been drawn in the space between them. Her lips curved into a subtle, enigmatic expression that hovered somewhere between a smirk and a smile, a curve that held more secrets than Severus cared to decipher. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Severus," she said, her voice a silken thread winding through the air. And then, just like that, she was gone, leaving behind only the faintest trace of her perfume and a room that felt suddenly, inexplicably empty. Severus stood still, his mind racing with a tumult of thoughts, each one more unsettling than the last. He was left with a head full of questions, each unanswered query more tantalizing than the one before. And a body that, much to his frustration, had very clear answers. Damn it. Severus took a step into the familiar expanse of Prince Manor and felt the top bands of stress that had wound around his muscles begin to loosen their grip, even if just marginally. Home. It was a concept that had long eluded him, a label that never sat quite right when applied to this place or any other for that matter. Yet, standing there, after having navigated the treacherous thicket of the magical Congress of the United States of America's latest assemblage, the manor felt like an oasis, a respite from the snide remarks and veiled hostilities he'd left behind. Eileen, his mother, stood at the foot of the grand staircase, her posture betraying a mix of relief and expectation. She greeted him with a rare, authentic smile, a fleeting thing, scarcely seen yet cherished whenever it graced her stoic features. "You survived," Eileen remarked, her voice laced with a dry sarcasm that only a mother could perfect when addressing her recently endangered offspring. With a dismissive snort, Severus concurred with her assessment. Barely. No sooner had the words escaped his lips than Julius, his irrepressible 10-year-old cousin, careened into him with the full force of youthful exuberance. "Did you duel anyone?" Julius queried, a mix of curiosity and hero worship sparkling in his eyes. "Did you hex someone? Is Malfoy Manor truly as eerie as the tales suggest?" Severus' smirk was immediate, a telltale twitch of lips that had just recently learned the art of indulging in harmless deception. He ruffled Julius' already disheveled hair in a show of affectionate teasing. "No, Julius," he confessed with faux solemnity. "I did not hex anyone." The boy's face fell into a comedic pout, his shoulders slumping with exaggerated disappointment. Boring. Laughter, unbidden and uncharacteristic, bubbled from Severus as he took the simplicity of home. "Good to see you too," he responded warmly, an undercurrent of sincerity coloring the exchange. Severus found a rare respite in the days that followed. He immersed himself in the warmth of his family's company, recounting his time at Ilvermorny with a mix of truth and embellishment that had young Julius hanging on his every word. Together they laughed, the sound echoing through their modest home, a testament to the joy that Severus had almost forgotten. He lent a hand to his mother in the kitchen, their hands deftly working in harmony as they prepared an array of dishes for the New Year's celebration. It was a period of tranquility that Severus savored, a stark contrast to the tumultuous life he had led of late. Yet, despite the comfort and familiarity that enveloped him, an inescapable shadow loomed on the horizon. The thought of his impending departure to Britain, back to the life he had left behind, cast a pall over his moments of happiness. The knowledge that this peaceful interlude was fleeting haunted his every smile, a bittersweet reminder of the world that awaited his return. Severus stood in his room, the last vestiges of twilight filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. The room was in a state of organized chaos, with books, scrolls, and various magical paraphernalia strewn about haphazardly, yet each item seemed to occupy a specific place within the disorder, known only to Severus himself. He was packing his trunk, an ornate, darkwood piece that had borne the brunt of his travels between Hogwarts and home for several years now. His decision, one that had been brewing in the cauldron of his mind for months, was now final. It had taken root in the fertile soil of his ambition and had grown, steadfast and unyielding. He would finish his education in Ilvermorny, the North American school of witchcraft and wizardry that had always held an allure for him, with its mysterious houses and untapped opportunities. This was not the familiar grounds of Hogwarts, nor the rolling hills of Britain that had been his home for so many years. Here, in the heart of Ilvermorny, he was greeted by an overwhelming sense of belonging. The corridors echoed with the lively chatter of students, their voices a harmonious blend of excitement and respect as they acknowledged his presence with warm smiles and nods. Severus, often accustomed to a more reserved reception, felt an unexpected sense of camaraderie as he passed by the vibrant house banners, Thunderbird, Wampus, and Horned Serpent, each one stirring a memory from his own time as a student. As he ventured deeper into the school, the weight of his past seemed to lighten, and a profound realization took root within him. Ilvermorny was more than just a place of magical learning. It was a sanctuary where he could redefine himself, free from the shadows of his former life. The world had undergone a remarkable transformation since his initial arrival at Ilvermorny as a young man, and so too had Severus undergone his own metamorphosis. With each step he took, he felt the chains of his old identity loosen, making way for the man he was destined to become. This was where he belonged, where the next chapter of his life would unfold, rich with potential and the promise of a future shaped by his own hand. Severus had scarcely taken 3 steps into the familiar, bustling corridor of their training quarters when a force collided with him, nearly knocking the wind from his lungs. "Sev, you're back." For a fleeting moment, he thought it might be Julius, but the voice was too mature, the embrace too vigorous. Severus braced himself as he was pulled into a suffocating headlock. "Let him go, Evie." Jonas's voice broke through, laced with amusement. "We need him in one piece for training." With a grunt, Severus managed to extricate himself from the aggressive welcome, just as Alessandro sauntered over, that infuriating smirk playing on his lips. "And here I thought you had finally abandoned us for the charms of British aristocracy," Alessandro said with a teasing drawl. "Couldn't resist the allure of those pompous noble lords, could you?" Severus met his friend's gaze with a steely, unimpressed stare. "You consider yourself a paragon of aristocracy, Alessandro. That's more than enough for me." With a theatrical flair, Alessandro placed a hand over his heart as if Severus's words had pierced him. "You wound me, my friend," he declared, though his eyes twinkled with mirth. Kira materialized at Severus's side, her hands planted firmly on her hips in a gesture of mock severity. "Did you at least bring back something scandalous? Some kind of forbidden British secret?" she inquired, her tone hopeful. Severus gave a dry response. "I brought myself." Kira's expression fell into exaggerated disappointment. "Not scandalous enough," she lamented, shaking her head. Their companion, Aurora, chuckled under her breath, her eyes glinting with mischief. "You mean to tell us you didn't assassinate a noble lord and pilfer his vaults? Now that would have been a tale worth hearing." Severus let out a sigh, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he shook his head in response to the jesting remarks of his companions. Yet, amidst the playful exchange, an unfamiliar warmth kindled within him, spreading through his chest like a comforting hearth fire on a cold night. These were his people. Their faces etched with a combination of rugged determination and the camaraderie that comes from shared trials and triumphs. The air was thick with their easy banter, a testament to the trust and the unspoken bonds that held them together. They were a patchwork of personalities and backgrounds, united by a common purpose that transcended individual differences. These were his friends, individuals he had come to know and respect deeply. Their laughter, their teasing, their unwavering support. All were elements of a life he had not anticipated finding amidst the turmoil of his mission. Each one brought something unique to their group dynamic, enriching Severus's existence in ways he had not thought possible. And after weeks of navigating the treacherous waters of British politics, where every word and gesture seemed laden with hidden agendas and double meanings, returning to this circle felt like coming home. It was a stark contrast to the calculated dance of the political arena, where the slightest misstep could lead to disaster. Here, he could shed the armor of diplomacy and simply be among those who accepted him without pretense, who welcomed the man behind the title. It felt damn good to be back, to be grounded in the reality of genuine human connection, away from the facades and gamesmanship that had consumed his days. This was where he could recharge, where the essence of who he was found refuge and affirmation. These were the moments that fueled him, that reminded him of why he endured the labyrinthine complexities of his role. For in the end, it was the authenticity of these relationships that provided the true measure of his success. Alessandro leaned against the solid oak desk, arms folded in a posture of casual authority that belied the intensity of his gaze. The room, once a whirlwind of activity, had quieted as the evening waned, leaving only the soft flicker of candlelight to dance upon the walls. Severus, usually a master of composure, seemed uncharacteristically subdued, his attention focused on the parchment laid out before him, though it was clear his thoughts wandered far beyond the ink and quill. "You've been avoiding something," Alessandro remarked, his voice cutting through the silence with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. Severus didn't look up from his work, his reply a low murmur that barely disturbed the air between them. "I've been avoiding many things." Alessandro's smirk was a sliver of moonlight in the dim room, a hint of amusement in an otherwise serious face. "Yes, but one thing in particular." With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken burdens, Severus finally lifted his eyes to meet Alessandro's. "What is it, Alessandro?" Leaning forward slightly, Alessandro fixed his friend with that piercing gaze. "Britain got to you, didn't it?" The question hung in the air, an uninvited guess that neither could ignore. Severus's silence stretched on, a taut thread of tension that vibrated with the gravity of the past. Then, in a voice that was almost a whisper but carried the force of a confession, Severus spoke. It was a reminder. Alessandro's eyes, sharp and perceptive, missed nothing. He saw the flicker of memory pass over Severus's face, the tightening of his jaw. Of what? Alessandro pressed gently, aware that he was treading on hallowed ground. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the answer that would reveal the depths of Severus's introspection. Severus let out a long, weary sigh, his fingers drumming an erratic rhythm against the fabric of his trousers, betraying the tension that coiled within him. Each tap was a subtle, yet urgent, reminder of the oppressive atmosphere that permeated every corner of Britain, a country now smothered by the encroaching specter of conflict. It was a stark testament to the perilous tightrope of politics that he had so deliberately chosen to abandon, a world teetering on the brink of chaos and devastation. War was no longer a mere possibility, it was an inexorable tide, sweeping all in its path. "I made the right choice leaving," Severus conceded aloud, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction, a hard-won certainty that had etched itself into the very fiber of his being. "But they won't let me go so easily." The words hung in the air, a sobering acknowledgement of the relentless pursuit that he knew would follow. Across from him, Alessandro's gaze was penetrating, a keen instrument that probed beyond the surface. "You planning to get involved?" The question was posed with an air of casual curiosity, but the undercurrent was clear. It was an inquiry about allegiances, about the very nature of Severus's intentions in this game of power and betrayal. Severus felt a sudden stillness descend upon him, a quiet that settled like a shroud. His mind, for a fleeting moment, was elsewhere, in a grand ballroom where shadows clung to every corner, where the memory of Voldemort's presence was as palpable as the darkness that had once enveloped it. He could still envision the intricate dance of influence and control, the silent yet potent manipulations that had unfolded with a predator's grace. "I'm planning to stay free," Severus replied, the resolve in his voice as unyielding as steel. It was a declaration, a vow to himself, and to the man who now watched him with a mixture of respect and amusement. Alessandro's smirk blossomed into a full-fledged grin, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. Good answer, he said, the approval in his voice. Severus had scarcely arranged his belongings in the dormitory when an unsettling sensation crept over him. It was an aura, a sense of someone's nearness that he knew all too well. The presence was not oppressive, nor was it commanding attention forcefully. Yet, it held an undeniable familiarity that resonated with him. With a sense of inevitability, he turned towards the source of the disturbance. There she stood, framed in the doorway, having already breached the threshold of his sanctuary. Selene Everett, a figure from his past that often lingered in his thoughts, both as a balm and as a thorn. This time, the usual mocking smile that so often graced her lips was conspicuously absent. There was no playful banter dancing in her eyes, no taunting edge to her posture. Instead, her keen, golden gaze swept over him with an intensity that seemed to see right through him, scrutinizing and piercing. You're finally back, Selene murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried a weight that filled the room. Severus, ever the observer, noted the change in her demeanor. He tilted his head in a silent inquiry, a flicker of curiosity crossing his features. Were you waiting? He asked, his tone betraying a hint of skepticism. A soft laugh escaped her, a sound that seemed almost reluctant, as she folded her arms defensively across her chest. TCH. As if, maybe I just happened to be passing by, she retorted, her words a futile attempt to maintain the familiar barrier of indifference between them. The arch of Severus's eyebrow spoke volumes more than words could. It was a challenge, a silent call for her to lay bare the truth. Her defenses crumbled slightly as a smirk played upon her lips, the corners turning up in a gesture of resigned honesty. All right, fine, she conceded with a hint of exasperation. Maybe I wanted to see you. The admission hung in the air, transforming the atmosphere from one of casual encounter to something far more significant. She approached with a deliberate slowness, granting him the silent opportunity to retreat if the impulse struck him. But he remained steadfast, his feet rooted to the spot, a silent acquiescence to her proximity. As she neared, the subtle aura of her warmth enveloped him, a tangible presence that seemed to beckon him closer. With a graceful motion, she lifted a hand, allowing her finger to trace the delicate edge of his collar, a feather-light touch that sent an unspoken message. You look different, she observed, her voice a soft murmur that hung between them. Do I? He replied, his tone betraying a hint of curiosity despite himself. Selene's gaze traversed his features, her eyes alight with an intensity that suggested she was peeling back layers, seeking the truth hidden beneath his stoic exterior. A moment of silence passed before her lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. No, she confessed, her voice laced with an undeniable thread of amusement. Still the same brooding, frustratingly composed Shafiq. A sharp exhalation escaped him. Disappointed? He asked, the single word carrying the weight of a challenge. Selene leaned in, her lips hovering just a whisper away from his, close enough that her next words ghosted against his skin. Not even a little. And then, without further preamble, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was neither a demand nor a tease. It was a statement, an undeniable affirmation of her intent, imbued with the unwavering certainty that was so inherently Selene Everett. Severus found himself surrendering to the moment, his fingers seeking the softness of her dark hair, twining through the silken strands as if to tether himself to the reality of her. In the midst of their embrace, the rest of the world seemed to fade into the background, a backdrop to the singular, pivotal shift that was occurring in their private universe. Britain had reminded him of everything he wanted to escape. The dreary weather, the oppressive expectations, and the relentless class system that had always made him feel like an outsider. But Ilvermorny, the North American wizarding school, reminded him of everything he had gained since leaving Britain behind. Here, he had found a new beginning, a place where his talents were recognized and his origins were not held against him. Selene pulled back, her eyes gleaming with a mix of mischief and affection. "So," she asked, her voice teasing, "am I interrupting your very important return to academia?" Severus allowed a smirk to play across his lips, his usual stern demeanor softening in her presence. "If you are," he replied, his voice low and sardonic, "I don't particularly mind." Celine's laughter was a bright sound that seemed to echo through the room, dispelling the solemnity that often clung to Severus like a second skin. Celine leaned in closer and kissed his lips passionately. Severus reciprocated, stroking her tongue with his, allowing her to bite his bottom lip and taste the thirst in his mouth. They didn't even care about the saliva dripping from the corners of their lips. Wildly kissing, their hands weren't idle, unbuttoning each other's shirts with a frenzy. It was so wild and reckless that none of them cared if their clothes were wrinkled. Severus couldn't wait to touch her soft bronze skin under her clothes, caressing and kneading the gentle curves of her flesh. As her shirt came off and thrown towards the desk, his was thrown to the floor. Severus took a moment to marvel at her gentle, maturing hills, covered by the pure silver silk bra that contrasted well with her smooth, amber skin. Their desire for one another was palpable, the air around them crackling with an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. Celine reached behind her back, deftly unclasping her bra, allowing it to fall away and reveal her perfectly formed melons. They were a sight to behold, their beauty and allure a testament to the passage of time and the woman she had become. Severus couldn't resist. He leaned in, his lips capturing one of her buds in a tender, delicate kiss. He teased her gently, his tongue flicking back and forth in an enticing dance that made her gasp and moan. He lavished attention on her, his lips traveling back and forth between her melons, his hands cradling and caressing their soft weight. Celine's fingers tangled in his hair, her nails grazing his scalp as she guided him to her other melon, her body moving in sync with his ministrations. Their connection was profound, their love for one another a tangible force that seemed to envelop them both. While Severus and Celine delved deeper into the realm of each other's physical boundaries, their movements evolved into an urgent and intense dance of desire. This time, as their passion escalated, Severus was adrift from the shackles of his past, and future concerns momentarily dissipated. As he reveled in the warmth of Celine's embrace, he became acutely aware that this intimate connection transcended time itself. As they lay entwined, their breaths mingling, their hearts pounding in tandem, the intricate web of their shared history seemed to unravel, and only the raw, unbridled passion of the present remained. The wandering hands, exploring each curve and contour, spoke volumes about the long-repressed desire that now echoed throughout the room. Celine, in turn, responded with equal fervor, her own desires igniting like a wildfire. As they moved together, their limbs intertwined, their bodies harmonizing in a symphony of raw, primal need, it was clear that they were both irrevocably caught in the whirlwind of a passion that had been smoldering between them. As their intimate encounter approached its crescendo, the world around them effectively disintegrated, its remnants falling away like so much dust. In this all-consuming moment, there was only Severus and Celine, their bodies intertwined in a sensual ballet that spoke volumes about the depth of their emotion. As the final notes of their passionate symphony reverberated throughout the room, they clung to one another, their breathing ragged, their bodies sated but their spirits soaring. In this fleeting moment of mutual fulfillment, Severus experienced a profound sense of tranquility. It was indescribably fantastic to be back, enveloped in familiar surroundings and engaging in familiar pursuits without any worries. Severus had never been subjected to such rigorous training before. The dueling club at Hogwarts now seemed like a distant memory, a mere playground where students indulged in the pretense of combat readiness, naively believing that the forceful casting of Expelliarmus qualified them as duelists. Here, at Ilvermorny, the stakes were starkly different. The training hall had been meticulously transformed into a facsimile of a battlefield, replete with intricate, layered wards that deftly absorbed the onslaught of magical energy, ensuring the safety of onlookers. At the heart of this intense scene stood Professor Harland, his keen gaze missing nothing, his demeanor implacable. Again he commanded. Severus scarcely had a moment to catch his breath before his opponents, Ben and Damien, launched their coordinated assault. Damien initiated the attack with a display of aggressive precision, unleashing a relentless volley of hexes aimed at pinning Severus into a defensive stance. Ben, with his more deliberate approach, sought to maneuver Severus into a corner, restricting his movement and leaving him vulnerable. Severus was no stranger to dueling these two individually, matches from which he had emerged victorious. But together, they presented a formidable challenge, denying him the luxury of formulating a counter-strategy. His mind raced, attempting to analyze the situation, to devise a plan, but the pace of the encounter allowed for no such contemplation. A hex from Ben whistled past Severus's shoulder, far too close for comfort. With a swift twist, Severus narrowly evaded the spell, his wand instinctively lashing out to erect a nonverbal barrier between himself and his attackers. Undeterred, Damien swiftly adapted, skillfully circumventing the shield's perimeter. In the next instant, a stunner, cast with devastating accuracy, grazed Severus's ribs. The impact was jarring, a bolt of pain searing through him, yet he pushed it aside, refusing to succumb to the incapacitating effects of the spell. Professor Harlan's voice sliced through the chaotic din of the training arena, sharp as a blade. "Shafik, you're thinking too much. That'll get you killed." Severus clenched his jaw. The sting of the rebuke is palpable as the sweat trickling down his temples. He was acutely aware of the truth in Harlan's words, a truth that haunted him like a specter at every turn. Severus had always known that overthinking was a flaw in the heat of battle, but knowing and rectifying were two disparate beasts. How could one not think, yet still act with purpose and precision on the battlefield? It was a paradox that tangled his thoughts like a thorny bramble. Without warning, Harlan halted the sparring match, his boots thudding against the wooden floor as he approached Severus with an air of stern determination. The professor's eyes, a piercing shade of blue, held a crypto of challenge that was both daunting and invigorating. "You're still fighting like a strategist, Shafik." Harlan's voice was tinged with a mix of frustration and admiration. "Fine, we're going to break that habit." Severus stood taller, a sense of unease prickling at the back of his neck. "How?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of trepidation. The corner of Harlan's mouth curled into a smirk, an expression that never boded well for his students. "Simple. You don't get time to think." With a flourish of his wand, Harlan conjured a countdown in the air. It began to tick down from 30 seconds, each moment passing with an audible click that seemed to echo in the silence of the room. The digits glowed with an urgency that made Severus's heart pound in his chest. "You either land a hit, or you lose," Harlan declared, his tone final. Severus's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one colliding with the pressing urgency of the looming deadline. The weight of the moment was palpable, the ticking clock a relentless reminder of the stakes at hand. He understood that action was paramount, and that his survival hinged on his ability to abandon deliberation for the raw immediacy of instinct. As the duel recommenced without delay, Severus found himself in a state of heightened alertness. His senses were sharpened by the adrenaline coursing through his veins, and he embraced the necessity of acting without the luxury of contemplation. Ben made the first move, lunging with a swift and calculated strike. Severus responded with a fluidity born of necessity, his body shifting out of harm's way before his conscious mind could process the threat. The spell intended for his ribs passed harmlessly through the space he had just vacated. No sooner had he evaded Ben's attack than Damien attempted to capitalize on the chaos, twisting with a dexterity that belied his size. But Severus was already there, meeting the challenge with a counterspell that sprang from his wand, as if by reflex. His hex, sharp as a blade, intercepted the attack aimed at his wand arm, neutralizing the threat with a precision that surprised even himself. In this crucible, Severus discovered a new truth. Instinct transcended strategy, and raw reaction outshone meticulous calculation. The relentless march of time served as his only measure, the ticking timer an unforgiving metronome to the dance of danger and defiance. 15 seconds remained, and with each beat of his heart, Severus felt the transformation within him. The strategist, who had always plotted 3 steps ahead, stepped aside, making way for the survivor who trusted in the purity of instinct. With 10 seconds left on the clock, Ben attempted to regain the upper hand, but Severus's spell intercepted his, the two forces colliding in a spectacular display of magical might. The rebounding energy struck Ben's legs, causing him to falter, his footing no longer certain. Severus's gaze was locked on the timekeeper, the seconds ticking away with agonizing finality. 5 seconds. That was all that remained of the duel. It was a sliver of time that would demand everything he had. With a swift pivot, Severus found Damien already in motion, a blur of robes and intent. There was no time for deliberation, no room for error. Severus acted on pure instinct, his wand hand moving with a speed born of countless hours of practice and a desperate need to prove himself. A surge of unrefined magical energy erupted from the tip of his wand, the spell unspoken yet brimming with raw power. It was a testament to his innate ability, honed through years of study and now unleashed in a moment of truth. Damien, caught off guard by the suddenness of the attack, collided with the dueling floor, his own spell fizzling out harmlessly. The countdown that had been a relentless pressure in Severus's mind disappeared, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, the corner of Harlan's mouth twitched upwards into a satisfied grin. "That's more like it," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness. Severus released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, the sound of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. He wasn't naive enough to believe he had achieved perfection, far from it. But as he stood there, amidst the settling dust of the dueling arena, he couldn't deny the sense of accomplishment that washed over him. This was progress, a tangible step forward on the path he had chosen. And with that thought, a new determination took root within him. After an exhaustive period of intense training, Severus Snape found himself being physically hauled by his friends to a common area within the bustling school of Ilvermorny. His friends, it seemed, had reached a unanimous decision that his single-minded pursuit of martial prowess had gone on long enough. "You look like you're about to cast the unforgivable curses on someone, Shafik," Jonas remarked with a playful smirk, reclining in his chair as he observed Severus's dour expression with undisguised glee. Ben, never one to mince words, let out a snort of laughter. "He always looks like he's been sucking on sour apples." Alessandro, ever the jester, swirled his drink languidly, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "Our dear Severus has become so engrossed in his rigorous regimen that he appears to have forgotten the very essence of enjoyment. It's a veritable travesty." Severus, in lieu of a verbal retort, simply rolled his eyes, a tacit admission of the truth in their teasing. Evie, with a gleam in her eye that was both challenging and mischievous, made an unexpected proposition. "All right, Shafik, you and me. A non-magical spar. Right here, right now." Severus regarded her with suspicion, his eyes narrowing. "You just want an excuse to hit me." Evie's smirk broadened into a full-blown grin. "You say that like it's a bad thing." And so they squared off, the air around them charged with anticipation. The ensuing scuffle was brief yet intense, with Evie ultimately emerging victorious, much to the delight of the onlookers. Alessandro, caught in the throes of uncontrollable laughter, nearly toppled from his seat, tears of mirth streaming down his face. Amidst the raucous laughter, Hera approached Severus with a butterbeer in hand, gently nudging it into his grasp and urging him with a warm smile to unwind and partake in the light-hearted camaraderie for once. For the first time in a long time, he did. As the night deepened, Aurora, with a look of genuine curiosity, turned the conversation towards Severus's current endeavors and potion research. "Still finding yourself at an impasse?" she inquired, her voice a soft murmur in the dimly lit room. Severus let out a protracted sigh, the weight of his unyielding task evident in the tension that lined his face. "Indeed," he confessed, his voice tinged with a rare note of frustration. "There's a piece of the puzzle that eludes me. Something critical is missing, and I've yet to ascertain precisely what it is." Aurora, lost in thought, hummed a pensive tune, her gaze fixed on the myriad of potion vials and ancient tomes that cluttered the workspace. "Perhaps," she ventured, breaking the silence, "you're approaching the conundrum from an unproductive angle. What if you shifted your focus from the mechanics of absorption to the intricacies of controlled release? Might that not yield more fruitful results?" The suggestion hung in the air, a potentially transformative idea that challenged the very foundation of Severus's methodical approach. He paused, his dark eyes narrowing as the gears of his brilliant mind began to turn at an accelerated pace. The silence was palpable, the only sound the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner of the room. Then, as if a veil had been lifted, A spark of understanding flashed across Severus's face. His lips parted, and he whispered almost to himself, "Controlled release." Of course. Why did I not see it before? The revelation seemed to invigorate him, dispelling the earlier clouds of doubt and frustration. In the stillness of the night, amidst the echoes of alchemical discovery, a breakthrough had been achieved. With renewed vigor, Severus set about adjusting his experimental setup, his movements now imbued with a sense of purpose and anticipation. Aurora watched on, a satisfied smile playing on her lips, knowing she had played a pivotal role in the unraveling of a mystery that had long plagued the mind of the talented potion master. Later that night, Severus found himself immersed in the dim, flickering light of his concealed laboratory, a sanctuary where he could pursue his potion craft without interruption. The room was filled with the faint echo of bubbling concoctions and the scent of rare herbs and strange ingredients. His gaze was fixed intently on the notes spread before him on the worn wooden desk. Aurora's insightful words reverberated within his thoughts, challenging him, pushing the boundaries of his already formidable expertise. The concept was revolutionary, a potion that, rather than acting immediately in full, would offer its benefits in distinct stages. A two-phase release that would not only heal but also safeguard against the pitfalls of over-reliance. With renewed determination, Severus set about refining his creation. He meticulously adjusted the cooling times, allowing the potion to develop a more complex and stable structure. He scrutinized the composition of the stabilizing agents, ensuring they were balanced to maintain the potion's integrity over time. The ingredient ratios were recalibrated with precision, each component measured and added with a master's touch. The potion, previously a mere idea, was now taking shape under his skilled hands. The moment of truth arrived as Severus prepared for the final test. With a practiced ease born from years of dedication, he orchestrated the ingredients within the cauldron. A soft glow began to emanate from the brew, a sign of the magic reaching its crescendo. The air was thick with anticipation as he watched, his heart beating in sync with the rhythmic pulsations of the potion. As the cauldron's light settled into a steady radiance, Severus knew he had achieved success. He carefully extracted a minuscule drop of the elixir, just enough to ascertain its safety and efficacy without risking an overwhelming dosage. He felt the magic surge through him, a gentle but potent current that affirmed his accomplishment. There were no adverse reactions, no signs of dependency. It was a triumph of alchemy and intellect. The potion was a testament to his perseverance and genius. He had not only met the challenge, but had surpassed all expectations. Severus allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, a silent acknowledgement of the tireless work and relentless pursuit of knowledge that had led him to this pivotal moment. The breakthrough was more than a personal victory. It was a contribution that could revolutionize the field of potion making and potentially save countless lives. As dawn crept through the narrow windows of the laboratory, casting a pale light over the scene, Severus carefully bottled the potion, each vial a vessel of hope and healing. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with scrutiny and trials, for a discovery of this magnitude would not go unchallenged. Yet, he felt ready to face the skepticism and rigorous testing that lay ahead. His potion was more than a mere concoction. It was a beacon of progress in the magical world. Severus approached Professor Langford's office with a sense of anticipation the following morning, clutching a small vial filled with a shimmering, iridescent liquid that seemed to dance with an inner life of its own. The potion inside was the culmination of countless hours of meticulous work, and now it was time for the esteemed professor's judgment. Upon entering, the familiar scent of parchment and ancient tomes greeted him. Professor Langford, a figure of formidable reputation in the potions community, sat behind her desk, a picture of scholarly intensity. She looked up as Severus closed the door behind him, her eyes immediately drawn to the vial he presented. With practiced grace, Langford reached out and took the potion from him, holding it up to the light. The liquid inside refracted the morning sun into a spectrum of colors that played across her face. She rotated the vial gently, her keen eyes scrutinizing every minuscule detail as the potion swirled within. Breaking the seal with a soft pop, Langford released a small amount of the potion's essence into the room. A faint hum, imperceptible to an untrained ear, resonated through the space, a telltale sign of sophisticated magic at work. The air around them seemed to grow denser, charged with the potion's latent power. A flicker of surprise crossed Langford's typically impassive features, hinting at her initial assessment. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, her voice a mixture of admiration and intrigue. Severus stood silent and composed, his outward calm belying the pounding of his heart. He had poured everything into this creation, and now its fate lay in the hands of the woman before him. Langford proceeded to conduct a series of rigorous tests, evaluating the potion's consistency with a practiced flick of her wand, measuring its magical saturation with an array of enchanted instruments, and analyzing the careful balance of its ingredients with a critical eye. She sniffed, she tasted, she cast delicate spells that revealed the potion's properties in a kaleidoscope of arcane runes and symbols. After a prolonged period of meticulous work that seemed to stretch on interminably, Evelyn Langford finally placed her wand on the worn wooden surface of her workbench and lifted her gaze to meet Severus's. With a tone that mingled curiosity and a touch of skepticism, she inquired, "You're certain about these ratios?" Severus Shafik, known for his punctilious nature, especially when it came to potion making, gave a curt nod. Triple-checked, he affirmed with unwavering confidence. His voice, though calm, carried an unmistakable note of pride. The controlled release mechanism is designed to prevent any form of dependency. Moreover, the innovative stabilizing agent I've incorporated ensures that the potion's efficacy is sustained over time, without any compromise to its therapeutic effects. Langford, a seasoned potioneer herself, let out a low hum as she considered the implications of his words. Her eyes, reflecting a deep understanding of the significance of such a breakthrough, narrowed thoughtfully. "This will not go unnoticed in the potions world," she remarked, her voice tinged with a mixture of anticipation and caution. She knew well that such a revolutionary potion would send ripples through their community, potentially altering the landscape of magical medicine and the lives of those who relied on such concoctions. He handed over the finalized research documents, the culmination of months of tireless work and rigorous experimentation. The title page bore Aurora's name, clearly credited as research assistant. Langford, upon noticing this, raised an eyebrow in silent inquiry. "You're giving her credit?" Langford's voice carried a hint of surprise, his gaze fixed on the name beside Severus's own. "She deserves it," Severus replied, his tone resolute and unwavering. This groundbreaking work wouldn't have been possible without her invaluable contributions. Her insights and dedication were indispensable to the project's success. Langford nodded, his expression shifting to one of approbation. "It will be submitted to the International Confederation of Wizards for review," he stated, his voice imbued with anticipation. "If it passes their stringent evaluation, Shafik, you'll be making history. And Aurora, she will have earned her place in the annals of magical research." The gravity of the moment was not lost on Severus. The recognition of Aurora's efforts was not only a testament to her abilities but also a reflection of his belief in fairness and collaboration. Together, they had pushed the boundaries of magical knowledge, and now they stood on the precipice of a discovery that promised to redefine their field. Severus emerged from the hallowed confines of Langford's office, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous corridor. He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his accomplishment to settle upon his shoulders. With a deliberate breath, he released the tension that had gripped him for so long. A rare sense of contentment washed over him, a fleeting yet potent reward for his unwavering dedication. In the quiet of the moment, Severus acknowledged the magnitude of what he had achieved. It was a feat that transcended the ordinary triumphs of academic life. He had single-handedly shattered a record that had stood unchallenged for countless generations, a testament to the brilliance that Langford himself had begrudgingly admitted was unparalleled among his peers. A ghost of a smile played on his lips as he reflected on the significance of his success. The British educational system, with its centuries-old traditions and often rigid expectations, had been forced to recognize his exceptional abilities. The realization that he had irrevocably altered his position within the academic hierarchy filled him with a quiet, simmering pride. "If Britain thought they could ignore me before, they certainly won't now," he murmured to himself, the words serving as both a statement of fact and a promise for the future. The world of academia had been put on notice. Severus was a force to be reckoned with, and his name would be etched in the annals of history. The satisfaction he felt was not just for the recognition he had earned, but for the doors that were now flung open before him, leading to a destiny that was unmistakably his to claim. Severus sat hunched over his desk, the dim candlelight casting long shadows across his stern features. His fingers, seemingly disconnected from his thoughts, rolled a small vial back and forth, the motion hypnotic as he watched the luminescent swirl of his rejuvenation elixir. The potion, a culmination of months of tireless work, was finally complete, its surface shimmering with the promise of rejuvenation and the extension of life. With a sigh that betrayed a hint of exhaustion, Severus leaned back in his chair. The research that had consumed his every waking moment was now compiled into a meticulous manuscript, each page filled with detailed notes, precise measurements, and the complex incantations required to produce the elixir. The submission to the International Confederation of Wizards, ICW, Alchemical Review Board marked the end of one journey but the beginning of another, a period of anxious anticipation. The board had taken his formula into their capable hands, subjecting it to an array of rigorous tests designed to assess its efficacy and safety under a myriad of conditions. This was the final hurdle, a critical phase that was as secretive as it was stringent. Success meant global recognition and the immortalization of his name in the annals of alchemical history. Yet, despite the enormity of what lay ahead, Severus found himself besieged by a sense of restlessness that he could not quell. His mind, ever the bastion of discipline and focus, now rebelled against the stillness. It sought the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with the challenges of potions training, the intricate dance of magical duels, or the strategic machinations that had long been his sanctuary. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was no immediate crisis to avert, no dark plot to foil, no student to rescue from the consequences of their folly. The relentless drive that had propelled him through the years was now a restless energy with no outlet, leaving him in a rare state of limbo, waiting for the verdict that could change everything. At Ilvermorny, the educational approach was a stark contrast to the traditionalism of Hogwarts. The school's curriculum was designed to foster independent thought, practical skills, and inventiveness. It was not enough to merely memorize and recite information from textbooks. In Charms class, Professor Graves challenged the students to innovate, pushing them to develop new spells rather than merely replicating the established incantations. This creative freedom allowed Severus to explore the nuances of charm work in ways he had never considered before. Transmigration at Ilvermorny was equally unconventional. The students were encouraged to engage in free-form transfiguration, a practice that involved transforming objects without relying on standard spell templates. This required a deep understanding of the magical principles underlying the transfiguration process. Arithmancy and runes were also taught in a pioneering manner. Instead of just analyzing ancient spells, students at Ilvermorny were tasked with devising their own spell matrices. This personalized approach to arithmancy encouraged a level of magical ownership and tailored spellcraft that was entirely new to Severus. Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Ilvermorny's curriculum was the study of magical theory. The subject delved into the very mechanics of magic, a topic that Hogwarts had historically left unexplored. These discussions opened Severus's mind to the intricate workings of magical energies and their interactions with the world. Despite his initial reservations, Severus found himself flourishing in this stimulating environment. The focus on innovation and understanding resonated with him. At Hogwarts, his primary concern had been navigating the complexities of school life and the pressures of belonging to Slytherin House. But at Ilvermorny, he was not just surviving. He was excelling, pushing the boundaries of his magical abilities and academic pursuits. The next phase of Harlan's training delved deeply into the physical and mental aspects of wielding magic. It was not merely about casting spells. It was about honing the body and mind to a sharp edge of discipline. Remember, magic is only as potent as the vessel that channels it, Harlan had emphasized, his arms folded over his chest as he scrutinized the collection of students before him. Should your stamina fail you in the midst of a duel? All the magical prowess in the world won't save you. With those words, he ushered in a demanding new routine, one that would test their physical boundaries and fortify their resolve. Each day began with endurance training that would challenge the most seasoned of athletes. The students sprinted across the expansive grounds of Ilvermorny, their breaths forming clouds in the crisp morning air. They navigated intricate obstacle courses that were engineered to mirror the chaos of battle and engaged in sparring sessions that left them gasping for breath, their muscles aching with exertion. Strength and flexibility exercises were interwoven into the fabric of their daily regimen. They practiced combat roles that allowed them to evade spells with grace, balanced precariously on beams to improve their equilibrium, and mastered explosive movement techniques that made their dueling style both unpredictable and dynamic. Water was no barrier to a well-rounded warrior. Swimming and underwater training became pivotal components of their preparation. They learned to hold their breath for extended periods, to move silently beneath the surface, and to engage in combat where magic was scarce and survival hinged on physical prowess alone. Hand-to-hand combat sessions were a symphony of fluidity and force. Harland, who had devoted a lifetime to the study of martial arts, guided them through the dance of Tai Chi, the aggressive flurries of kickboxing, and the intricate grappling techniques that could disarm an opponent with minimal effort. Weapons training was an integral part of their education, and Harland, a master swordsman with an extensive knowledge of both Asian and European techniques, was their guide. He taught them the finer points of wielding daggers, using wands as defensive batons, and the intricate art of combat with magical staffs. Harland's teaching style was as sharp as the blades he handled with such expertise. "You think wands make you powerful?" Harland would scoff, his voice dripping with condescension as he twirled a wooden training sword with a dexterity that was both mesmerizing and intimidating. "Tell that to the wizard who gets his wrist broken before he can cast a spell," he would add, emphasizing the importance of physical prowess even in a magical duel. Severus, ever the attentive student, soaked up Harland's wisdom like a sponge. He understood that true power came from the integration of magical ability and physical skill. With each lesson, Severus honed his abilities, practicing tirelessly until his movements with the sword were as fluid and precise as Harland's. The training was rigorous, but Severus was determined to excel, knowing that the mastery of these weapons could one day save his life. Severus was not endowed with exceptional strength or extraordinary speed, but he possessed an indomitable spirit. Every training session was a testament to his relentless pursuit of improvement. Despite the grueling nature of the regimen, his stamina grew with each session that pushed him to his limits. He was a diligent student of combat, observing Harland's movements with the meticulous care of a puzzling deciphering a complex riddle. Through this intense scrutiny, he gleaned the subtleties of when to engage, when to evade, and when to cleverly turn an adversary's force against them. Damien, the renowned Wampus duelist, was a revelation to Severus. Damien's grace and power in physical confrontations were almost artistic, his movements a seamless fusion of fluidity and strength. After a particularly rigorous sparring match, Damien, with a rare note of admiration in his voice, conceded, "You're better than I expected," as he stretched his well-worked muscles. Severus, his face glistening with perspiration which he wiped away with the back of his hand, responded with a sly smirk, "And you talk more than I expected." The comment coaxed a laugh from Damien, who retorted, "Stick around, Shafiq. You might learn something." In the crucible of combat, an unspoken bond began to take root between Severus and Damien, a mutual respect born of shared adversity. This bond was not exclusive to the two of them. The training grounds were filled with other exceptional individuals, each with their own distinct style. Celine was a force to be reckoned with, her attacks a whirlwind of speed and ferocity that made her particularly lethal in close quarters. Jonas's approach was one of brute force, while Ben's strength lay in his tactical acumen, outmaneuvering opponents with his mind. Evie's unpredictability kept everyone on their toes, her erratic fighting style impossible to anticipate. Severus was steadfastly carving out his place among the esteemed pantheon of combatants. With each rigorous training session, he refined his skills, honing his prowess and showcasing a marked improvement that did not go unnoticed. It was clear to all observers that he was on a swift trajectory to becoming a formidable opponent. His dedication and the strides he made in his abilities hinted at an imminent future where he would be a dominant force within the arena, striking fear into the hearts of his adversaries. The transformation was not yet complete, but the signs of Severus's burgeoning strength and the promise of his potential were undeniable. Severus found himself swept into the sixth-year common room by the tide of his friends, all of whom were determined to salvage what was left of the evening from the clutches of his relentless studies. The warm, inviting glow of the fireplace did little to thaw the icy shell of concentration that had enveloped him for weeks. "You're wound tighter than a dragon's jaw," Jonas observed, his tone light, but his eyes sharp as he handed Severus a glass of frothy cider. The liquid inside swirled with hints of apple and cinnamon, a small indulgence Severus hadn't realized he'd been craving. Severus accepted the glass, his eyebrow arching in a silent challenge. "You say that like it's a bad thing," he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching with the faintest hint of a smile. "It is," Kira chimed in, her voice firm. She crossed her arms, her expression a blend of concern and exasperation. "We get it, Severus. You're brilliant. But for once, stop trying to conquer the world and just enjoy yourself." Alessandro, lounging with feline grace on one of the plush armchairs, offered a smirk that seemed to split the room. "He won't," he said with an air of certainty. "He enjoys the chase too much." The conversation that evening had taken a turn that Severus found not have predicted. It began with the usual banter and good-natured ribbing that he had come to expect from his friends. Alessandro, with his characteristic charm, was attempting to W a student from the Thunderbird house in conversation, his words laced with flirtatious undertones that were as much a part of him as his wont. Meanwhile, Evie, who was never one to back down from a challenge, had just thrown down the proverbial gauntlet to Jonas. The challenge was an arm wrestling match, a contest that seemed almost comical given Evie's petite stature compared to Jonas's burly build. The atmosphere was light, the laughter infectious, and Severus found himself drawn into the camaraderie despite his usual reserve. It was in the midst of this lively scene that the topic of discussion shifted to potions theory. Aurora, whose intellect was as sharp as her tongue, began to expound on the intricacies of potion making with a passion that was hard to ignore. Besides Severus, Aurora was a picture of focused intent, her quill dancing across the parchment as she multitasked between the conversation and her own complex thoughts. "Speaking of chases," she said, pausing to tap her quill thoughtfully against her latest potions theory, "I've been thinking about a potential brewing technique that utilizes layered distillation rather than single-process extraction." Severus turned to her, his interest piqued. The world of potions was a sanctuary, and any new perspective was a treasure to be explored. "Explain," he commanded, his voice betraying a spark of enthusiasm he rarely showed. As Severus listened, his mind began to race with the possibilities that her words suggested. Before he realized it, an idea for his next potions project had taken root in his thoughts, sparked by an offhand comment from Aurora that she herself did not recognize as significant. The idea was tantalizing, a potential breakthrough that could elevate his work to new heights. It was a twist on a classic potion, a variation that could yield remarkable results if executed correctly. Severus's mind was already cataloging the necessary ingredients, the precise measurements, and the delicate adjustments to temperature that would be required. As the evening wore on and the others continued their revelry, Severus found himself lost in contemplation, the seeds of his next project germinating in the fertile ground of his potions knowledge. The laughter and chatter around him faded into a distant hum as he turned the idea over in his mind, examining it from every angle, refining it, and eagerly anticipating the moment when he could begin to bring it to fruition. Severus had scarcely closed his eyes when a subtle disturbance in the air alerted him to an intruder's presence. His instincts, honed by years of vigilance, did not prompt him to grasp for his wand. He recognized the familiar aura. It was as unique to him as his own. "Celine," he said, his voice a low rumble, roughened by the lateness of the hour. "Couldn't sleep?" She was leaning against his desk with an air of nonchalance, her arms folded in a way that accentuated the lean muscles beneath her fitted shirt. Her silver eyes met his with an intensity that belied her casual posture. "Noticed you were stressed," she replied, her tone light but her gaze unwavering. "Thought I'd help." A smirk, so faint it might have been a trick of the dim light, tugged at the corner of Severus's mouth. "You're persistent," he observed, a note of reluctant admiration creeping into his voice. Her lips curled into that sharp, knowing smirk of hers, the one that had a disconcerting effect on his composure, sending a wave of heat through his veins. "And you like it," she retorted with unassailable confidence. He could not deny the truth in her words. Celine had an uncanny ability to see through his defenses, to anticipate his needs in a way that both irritated and intrigued him. With a fluid motion, she uncrossed her arms and pushed away from the desk, her movements precise and graceful as she approached him. She expected him to remain seated, to yield to her initiative as he had done so many times before. But the events of the day had stoked a restless fire within him, a fire that now urged him to assert control over the situation. Tonight, he would not be the passive participant she anticipated. As she drew near, ready to dictate the course of their interaction with that easy confidence that was so inherently hers, Severus acted. In one swift movement, he rose from his chair, his intentions clear and his resolve unwavering. The surprise that flickered across her features was brief but satisfying. Before she could voice another syllable, Severus acted with swift precision. With a decisive motion, he drew her into his embrace, settling her onto his lap. His hands, firm and sure, found their purchase at her waist, the pressure of his fingers against her skin a silent claim of possession. In this moment, he was the undeniable maestro of their unfolding dance, setting a rhythm that left no room for hesitation. Celine's breath caught in her throat, her initial astonishment yielding to a wave of undeniable pleasure. Here, in the sanctuary of Severus's arms, the world narrowed to the singular sensation of their connection. For once, the usually calculating Severus was unshackled from the chains of meticulous thought. Gone was the relentless strategist, replaced by a man governed by the raw and unfiltered language of the body. He was awash in the sheer intensity of feeling, drinking in Celine's reactions with an insatiable hunger. Her teasing confidence, a veil that she wore so effortlessly, now slipped to unveil a vulnerability that resonated with his own. It was a revelation that struck a chord within him, a harmony that vibrated with the truth of their shared moment. The room, once a silent sanctuary of study and solitude, was now charged with an electric tension that hummed between them. Severus's heart pounded in his chest, a staccato rhythm that matched the pulsing energy in the air. He held Celine close, her form both familiar and thrillingly alien in this new dynamic that he had so boldly initiated. Celine's silver eyes, wide with surprise, searched his face for understanding. This was a side of Severus she had only glimpsed, a side that now demanded her attention and respect. The playful smirk that so often graced her lips had been replaced by a soft, quasi-reverent smile that acknowledged the shift in their relationship. "Severus," she whispered, her voice a mixture of wonder and the faintest hint of challenge. It was a challenge he was more than willing to meet. His hands, once content to simply hold her, now began to explore the contours of her body with a newfound confidence. Each touch was deliberate, each caress a silent promise of the pleasure to come. He felt her respond in kind, her own hands tracing the lines of his chest, her fingers tentatively tugging at the fabric of his shirt as if seeking to draw him even closer. The world outside their shared bubble ceased to exist. The stone walls of Ilvermorny, the whispering of the wind against the windows, the distant hoot of a magical creature, all faded into insignificance. There was only Severus and Celine, two souls locked in a dance as old as time itself. In the dim light of the room, their lips met in a fiery fusion of desire and longing. The kiss was a revelation, a meeting of equals who had finally shed the pretense and power plays that had so long defined their interactions. Here, there was no room for games. There was only the raw, unadulterated truth of their connection. Severus's mind, ever the analytical machine, fell silent. In its place rose an instinctual understanding of the rhythm of their dance. He responded to Celine's every movement, her every sigh, with an intuitive grace that surprised them both. When at last he withdrew, the transformation in Celine was unmistakable. Her golden eyes, now darkened pools of depthless desire, brimmed with an emotion that skirted the edges of reverence. Finally, she breathed, the words a gentle zephyr against his ear, "I was beginning to think you'd never catch up." A smirk, characteristic yet somehow transformed, played upon Severus's lips. "You underestimate me, Everett," he retorted, the timbre of his voice a low thrum that resonated between them. Celine's laughter was a melody, her fingers threading through his hair with a familiarity that spoke of intimacy and trust. "I really don't," she countered, her tone laced with a warmth that belied the lightness of her words. And with the night wrapped around them like a cloak, they lapsed into a companionable silence, speaking volumes without uttering another word. The world outside could wait. For now, they existed. Severus's dark eyes were fixed on the parchment before him, the golden emblem of the International Confederation of Wizards, ICW, catching the wavering glow of the enchanted lantern that illuminated his desk. The seal's luster seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a silent echo of the anticipation that tightened its grip on Severus's heart. His long, pale fingers trembled ever so slightly, hovering just above the parchment's edges as if afraid to touch the message it contained. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat a slow, deliberate echo that resonated within the stillness of the room. In the weeks leading up to this moment, Severus had immersed himself in the rigors of dueling training, the complexities of potions research, and the intellectual challenges of his academic pursuits. These tasks were his refuge, a bulwark against the relentless tide of thoughts and worries that threatened to overwhelm him whenever his mind strayed to the matter at hand. Yet now, with the answer that he had both yearned for and dreaded in equal measure lying within reach, Severus found himself unexpectedly reluctant to proceed. The knowledge that he was mere seconds away from uncovering his fate seemed to root him to the spot, a silent sentinel guarding the gates of his own destiny. Aurora, his fellow potions master and confidant, sat across from him, her emerald eyes alight with curiosity and concern. She was not as adept at masking her emotions, and her impatience was palpable. Leaning forward in her chair, she fixed him with an expectant gaze. "Severus," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it sliced through the silence like a knife. With a deep, steadying breath that seemed to draw in the very essence of the room, Severus steeled himself. His hand, now steady, moved with deliberate grace to break the seal that had held his future captive. The parchment unfurled beneath his fingers with a smoothness that belied its age and the weight of the words it bore. Severus Shafik's eyes darted over the lines, drinking in each phrase and clause with an urgency that spoke of years of toil and dedication. And then, there it was, a decree of acceptance, a proclamation that the potion he had so meticulously crafted had passed its final review. It was now deemed an original, patent-worthy creation. His name, Severus Shafik, a name once whispered with a mix of awe and derision, was now etched in the annals of the International Confederation of Wizards' global potioneering archives, a testament to his unparalleled skill and ingenuity. Aurora, his colleague and confidant, couldn't contain her shock, leaning over his shoulder to verify the incredible news. "Severus, you..." she began, but her voice faltered, unable to find the words to encapsulate the magnitude of his achievement. Severus felt a sharp exhale escape his lips, the sound almost foreign to his own ears. His grip on the parchment tightened reflexively, the texture of the ancient material grounding him as his mind raced to accept the reality of the moment. For so long, he had braced himself against the expected. Resistance, rejection, the cold shoulder of a wizarding world that had often failed to recognize the depth of his contributions. But now, faced with irrefutable proof of his success, Severus found his thoughts rebelling against the patterns of doubt and uncertainty that had long been his companions. It was real. The evidence was there, tangible and undeniable. The potion that had consumed his every waking moment, the elixir that had pushed the boundaries of magical science, had been acknowledged by the highest authorities. It was done. The years of experimentation, the sleepless nights, and the relentless pursuit of perfection had culminated in this singular, defining moment. He had rewritten his legacy. No longer would Severus Shafik be known merely as the brooding potions master with a shadowed past. His name would be spoken with reverence, synonymous with innovation and unparalleled mastery of the potions. By the time the news of Severus's achievement rippled through the enchanted stone walls of Ilvermorny, the magical community within was electrified with responses that ranged from awe to pride. The faculty and students alike buzzed with the knowledge that one of their own had garnered international acclaim. Professor Langford, renowned for her stoic demeanor, did not disappoint in her prompt reaction. Upon confirmation of the news, she summoned Severus to her office with an urgency that was unusual, even for her. The office, a sanctuary of ancient magical tomes and bubbling potions, felt charged with a palpable energy as Severus stepped inside. "Your research," Professor Langford began, her eyes piercing through her spectacles as she scrutinized the young potioner, "is exemplary. It is not every day that the International Confederation of Wizards, ICW, acknowledges the work of someone your age. This is unprecedented for a student at Ilvermorny." Severus, ever composed, offered a modest nod. "Thank you, Professor." Leaning back, Professor Langford crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "Have you considered the path forward? What will your next endeavor be?" Severus's eyes met hers, a spark of certainty igniting within him. "I have given it considerable thought," he replied, his voice steady and assured. The faculty of Ilvermorny, akin to a pride of lions alert to the scent of a fresh kill, did not lag behind in their response. Even those professors who had rarely crossed paths with Severus paused in the grand, magical hallways to extend their heartfelt praises. Each pat on the back and every word of commendation added to the surreal atmosphere that now enveloped him. Aurora, his devoted lab assistant, seemed to radiate with an inner light. The news that she had been credited in a research paper of such magnitude was a dream come true. Her name, etched alongside Severus's in an internationally recognized work, was an honor she had never dared to imagine. As they stepped out of Professor Langford's office, Aurora's voice held a trace of incredulity that was difficult to mask. "You know," she said, her words tinged with a mix of amazement and pride, "this means we'll be featured in the upcoming edition of the International Journal of Potioneering." Severus's lips curled into a faint smirk. "And?" he replied, his tone nonchalant, though his dark eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement. Aurora's scoff echoed in the corridor. "And? Severus, that's monumental. We're both on the cusp of being published potioneers. This is going to catapult your career to new heights." "I know," Severus responded, his voice calm, yet underscored by a quiet thrill of accomplishment that he refused to verbalize. His circle of friends was decidedly less reserved in their enthusiasm. Alessandro, ever the dramatist, enveloped Severus in a boisterous embrace the moment he laid eyes on him in the common room. "My dear Severus, do you comprehend the magnitude of this achievement?" Severus heaved a theatrical sigh. "That I'll have to endure your exaggerated antics?" he quipped, though a ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Undeterred, Alessandro continued, his voice reaching a crescendo of excitement. "This is historic. This is wealth incarnate. This is, oh, what is the phrase? The dawn of a new era for you, my friend. You're on the path to becoming a billionaire." Jonas, ever the voice of reason, interjected with a snort of laughter. "Can we at least wait until he's actually made his first million before you start planning how to spend it?" Kira, with her characteristic pragmatism, raised an eyebrow inquisitively. "Are we planning some sort of celebration for this milestone?" Evie's eyes sparkled with mischief as she leaned in, her voice tinged with excitement. "You know we're planning a huge bash to celebrate, right? But what's really on everyone's mind, eh?" She paused for dramatic effect, turning to Severus with an expression that was both playful and probing. "Will we be lucky enough to snag some free samples of your groundbreaking potion once it hits the market?" Severus, unamused, fixed her with a stern gaze. "I'm afraid that's out of the question," he replied, his tone leaving little room for argument. Severus was well aware that not everyone shared Evie's enthusiasm. In fact, he was acutely conscious of the undercurrent of dissent that his potion's success had stirred. As the days passed and the potion's potential began to permeate British news outlets, the ripples of its impact started to become evident. Accolades poured in from various quarters, but so did skepticism and fear. The public was abuzz with speculation, and it wasn't long before the whispers grew loud enough to reveal the true consequences that lay ahead. The Daily Prophet, a newspaper cherished by the magical community across the British Isles, had once again become the center of attention. With its headlines and stories, it had the power to stir excitement, controversy, and curiosity among wizards and witches far and wide. On this particular day, the Prophet's latest edition had crossed the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, its news traveling by owlpost, enchanted newspapers, and magical wireless signals. The reports within its pages sparked a flurry of conversations, debates, and even a touch of scandal, setting the wizarding world abuzz with speculation and anticipation. Readers from the cobbled streets of Diagon Alley to the remote villages of Scotland eagerly unfolded their copies, eager to discover the latest developments that were sure to become the talk of every pub, classroom, and gathering of magical folk. The youngest pioneer in potioneering. Severus Snape Breaks Records by Edgar Bones, senior magical correspondent. The history of British potioneering boasts legendary names: Zygmunt Budge, Damocles Belby, Arsenius Jigger. But today, another name has been etched into the global archives. Severus Snape, a mere 16-year-old, has successfully developed and patented an original rejuvenation elixir that is already being hailed as a revolutionary advancement in magical medicine and personal enhancement potions. The potion, now officially registered with the International Confederation of Wizards, ICW, has drawn worldwide attention due to its unique properties, enhancing skin rejuvenation, accelerating minor wound healing, and boosting magical resistance without the common side effects of dependency. A potion with no diminishing returns? This is no minor feat. More astonishingly, Snape is not affiliated with any of Britain's prestigious potioneering guilds. He is not a student of an ancient British apprenticeship. Instead, his discovery was cultivated in the halls of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in America, a fact that has already sparked debate within the British academic and political spheres. Why was this achievement not fostered in Hogwarts? Why was Britain not the first to recognize his brilliance? And what does it say about the state of magical research in our country that one of our own had to look abroad to achieve greatness? The Potioneers Guild was plunged into turmoil. Some senior members swiftly sought to adopt Severus as a paragon of British innovation, a stark departure from their previous neglect of his prodigious talents. Conversely, a faction within the guild worked feverishly to undermine his research, eager to uncover any imperfection that might lessen the impact of his groundbreaking work. Within the Ministry of Magic, opinions were sharply divided. The Department of International Magical Cooperation championed Severus's cause, eager to reintegrate him into the British magical community. However, more traditional elements within the ministry perceived his burgeoning autonomy as a direct challenge to the United Kingdom's historical dominance in the magical arts. The financial sector of the wizarding world was abuzz with activity. News of Severus's success had not gone unnoticed by the potion industry's heavyweights. Prominent British and European potion manufacturers rushed to contact the Snape estate, each aiming to secure exclusive rights to the new potion before their global counterparts could do the same. Public sentiment was a tapestry of praise and censure. Many hailed Severus as a testament to Britain's enduring capacity to produce exceptional wizards. Yet, a vocal contingent criticized him for what they deemed a betrayal, choosing to ply his craft overseas instead of bolstering the potion-making prowess of his homeland. But the potion was more than a mere concoction. It was a symbol. At just 16, Severus had achieved a feat that British magical institutions had long aspired to but never realized. His triumph was a solo endeavor, devoid of the traditional supports of Hogwarts, the Potioneers Guild, and the Ministry's oversight. Severus's success was a potent demonstration that the path to magical preeminence need not be trodden within the borders of Britain. This was no ordinary triumph for a potion maker. It was nothing less than a seismic shift in the balance of magical power. And for the entrenched ranks of Britain's magical aristocracy, such a shift was a source of deep discontent. The letter's arrival was heralded by the soft hoot of an owl, its silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the moonlit sky. It was not just any owl. This creature bore the unmistakable mark of distinction, an emissary from the British Potioneers Guild. Its feathers were immaculately groomed, each one lying sleek against its body, and around its neck, the emblem of the guild glinted with a quiet authority. Severus Snape, standing by the window, watched the owl's approach with an impassive gaze. His features, as always, were a mask of stoicism, betraying no hint of the anticipation or trepidation that might have stirred within him. With a fluid motion, he reached out and untied the small scroll fastened to the owl's leg, his fingers deftly navigating the knot without a trace of haste or eagerness. Aurora, who had been observing Severus from the comfort of her armchair, felt a familiar thrill of curiosity. She knew better than to interrupt the unspoken ritual of letter retrieval, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and she leaned forward, elbows resting on the arms of the chair. "Official correspondence?" she inquired, her voice a soft intrusion into the quiet of the room. Severus spared her the briefest of glances before returning his attention to the letter. "Seems that way," he replied, the words barely above a whisper, as if not to startle the secrets that lay concealed within the parchment. With deliberate care, he broke the seal, a small, satisfying crack resonating in the stillness. The parchment itself was of a quality that spoke of the sender's wealth or status, thick and textured, the kind that resisted the ink in a way that made each word seem all the more permanent. The script that adorned the page was a work of art, each letter formed with precision and an almost mathematical symmetry. It was the handwriting of someone who valued control, who weighed every word and its implication with meticulous care. Severus's eyes scanned the lines of text, taking in the cordial salutations and the carefully chosen phrases that followed. "Esteemed Ershafik, it is with great pleasure that the British Potioneers Guild extends an invitation to you for the upcoming Potioneers Symposium in London. Your recent achievements have been met with great admiration, and we believe your presence at this event would greatly enrich the discussion of modern advancements in potioneering. Furthermore, we would like to formally discuss the potential of your continued contributions to British magical research. We understand that your academic journey has taken you to foreign institutions, but we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the importance of your heritage and your potential role in advancing Britain's legacy in potion making. We look forward to your response and sincerely hope you will consider this an opportunity to reconnect with your homeland." Signed, the British Potioneers Guild. Severus placed the letter gently on the GLE, the sound of his fingertips tapping a staccato beat on the polished mahogany, filling the room's silence. The elegant script on the page seemed to dance before his eyes, a taunting ballet of words that held a weight beyond their ink. "They want you back," Aurora whispered, her breath warm against his ear as she leaned over his shoulder to read the missive. Her voice was laced with an understanding that went beyond the simple sentence. Severus's lips twisted into a sardonic smile, the expression not born of humor but of a bitter recognition of the game being played. "They don't want me," he replied, his tone steady and laced with certainty. "They want to keep me from slipping out of their control, to prevent me from becoming a loose end they cannot afford." Aurora regarded him with a thoughtful tilt of her head, her eyes searching his face for any trace of the turmoil she knew resided beneath his stoic exterior. "Are you going?" she asked, her words a soft probe into the fortress of his contemplation. A long, measured exhale escaped Severus, the sound a silent testament to the gravity of his predicament. His gaze lingered on the letter, the words etched into his memory. "I haven't decided yet," he finally answered, his voice betraying the faintest hint of the struggle that waged within him. For Severus knew a truth that those who penned the letter had yet to fully comprehend. The balance of power had shifted. Britain, with its once formidable influence, no longer held the cards. He did. And with that knowledge came a sense of control, a power he intended to wield with deliberate precision. They would wait for his decision, and in that waiting, they would come to realize that Severus was no longer a pawn to be maneuvered at their whim. He was a player in his own right, and he would dictate the terms of his return.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.
Wingardium Leviosa. Ronald Weasley. It's Leviosa. Leviosa. Stop.